I'm just going to present 2 minutes of what we are doing in RSPP, and then I pass the word to Ana Viñuela to coordinate the presentations of the various papers. So RSPP, as you know, is a regional science policy in practice. Is one of the 2 journals of Regional Science Association International, and is begin after the papers in regional science, and is now in a good movement. So we assume that regional science is about the study of human interaction within space with advanced replicable methods, and it is based on this definition that somehow we identify papers that are not suitable for our journal, either because they have space but they don't have human interaction, or because they have human interaction but they don't have space, or they don't use replicable methods that could be somehow show the evidences to all the other researchers and community as a whole. So we change a little bit the face of the cover. We introduce pictures, and we are mainly based on special issues. On one hand, because it is easier to get an impact, and it is also easy to mobilize people. The objective is somehow to have in 9 months, 6 months, like with COVID, to have a scientific response to some emerging issues that appear. That we did that with the COVID, and the last issue of 2020 was on the regional economic impacts of COVID, and we are trying to do that, trying to get the path of the issues that are important, regional issues that are important globally. So I think we are doing more or less well. So you're looking at Google citations, we are in a jump. So the aim is now to reach 1,000, more than 1,000, and doing that somehow we are able to be accepted for the citation index. So that we plan to present to apply this July, or eventually if the editorial board advises to do so in next year after, which is 2021, 2022. We will see in May what we are going to decide if we apply this year, and that will be, if we are not accepted, it will take 3 years to be accepted, or if we apply 2022. So this is the download trend. It's also good. The citations trend is also good because we have more papers, and the target was to have above 1 equivalent citation score. But now, of course, the benchmark is much higher, so we need to change it to be a little bit more strict, trying to have a higher nominator, but also a not lower denominator. So we are now in 60, 70 papers per year. We can grow a little bit more, but somehow for the present, we can stabilize that there. So these are the other which are not yet updated, because as you know, the updating of these Scopus indicators will come later in the year. But anyway, these first years of change, the indicators that are 2 years or 3 years indicators, of course, they change a lot, but that's not necessarily bad. We should see the long term. We have an award. So this year, the paper award is coming soon. So we need just one more free person of the jury to have his appointment. And that this is always very interesting and challenging, and I think this also creates some stimulus for to receive good papers. So for the plan of 2021, we need to somehow it is like that. So we try to launch a special issue. If the special issue does not reach a minimum of papers, accepted papers in the reasonable period, then of course we must join this topic with other topics that also did not reach the 10 papers and or 7 to 12 papers, and therefore we are obliged to join different topics and autonomous papers that are already submitted. Unfortunately, for the time being, while it does not allow us to have more than 6 issues per year, although we can have all the papers there we want. So this year we'll have 6 plus 1 because they allowed us to have a second issue on COVID, a special issue. But nevertheless, we organized different topics along that are being delayed along these 6 issues. So the next issue will be the one by Evelyn and María that is coming out next soon. Okay. So this exercise of this webinar will allow us to, well, with the experience we are getting, somehow in 2021 we can have this special issue coordinated by Ana Viñuela, connected with the EUREAL. This will be the 3rd special issue connected with this group of colleagues that we have in REAL in Europe. And I think it's going quite well, and this time will be coordinated by Ana Viñuela, although based on the topic that she is developing, but mobilizing also this network, although it is open to all the community. And that's it. So we want to initiate this type of webinars. This is the first one we are experiencing. Others can come, and the idea is to have an interaction between the people that is proposing submitting papers for the same special issue, and eventually bringing more authors to the special issue, and of course trying to help to develop better papers and shared papers, not only by the reviewers and the editors, but also in this interaction, which is somehow a surrogate, a substitute for the Congress, special Congress sessions in the Congress. And that's it. Now I can pass the word to Ana to coordinate the first. If Eduardo is not there, I don't see Eduardo, so I pass the word to Ana. Thank you very much for. Now we have 39 people attending, which is good, very good. Ana, can you take over?
Okay, thanks very much for your words, Tomaz. We all know Tomaz from conferences and congresses. It's very difficult to miss him, to be honest, because he's one of the ones that are always there in the conferences. Unfortunately, in these times, we cannot attend conferences, we cannot exchange our ideas, we don't have the chances like to meet personally, and these webinars are just the opportunity to share ideas between us and trying to improve everybody's papers, ideas, work, starting new lines of research between each other, which is something that usually we were doing through conferences or through meetings like the EUREAL that last year could not be taking place, unfortunately. However, we all know Tomaz, and he grabbed me and he says, hey, listen, there's no EUREAL this year, but you're going to put together a special issue. And I said, well, okay, fair enough, you know, can I deny that? And well, there was no way I could say no. Fortunately enough, I'm part of a European project where lots of partners from different European universities are participating. So there's plenty of things going on, plenty of people involved, plenty of new ideas that fit very, very well in the purpose of this journal of regional science policy and practice. So I pull out all my strings and we managed to get so far 6 people involved in this special issue on territorial inequalities, or as some other partners from some other areas call it, spatial justice. That is a new way of calling all things from another perspectives. That's something that I've learned through this European project. So we have here 6 samples of really nice work that can be done, like if focusing on territorial inequalities, on the disparities that are generated across space. And the purpose of this special issue is not only knowing how, but also how they can be addressed and at what level of policy making those disparities, if we want to address them, they should be addressed. Local level, regional level, national level. That's why the structure of this webinar is really nice. I have to say that because of time issues, the first presentation should be the last one. And I'll explain to you right now why. Because the way it was structured, starting with Paul Cairney first, was going to be an overview about regional policy and implementation of policies. And then we were going to move from general topics into more detailed topics. So the last one that could fit in the agenda was talking about ethnic minorities. That was a very nice structure, but due to time restrictions, basically that is 1 in the morning right now in Cambodia, Thailand, I don't remember where, someplace very, very exotic anyway. The first presentation will be that one that should be the last, like if we go from general topics into more detailed ones. Well, that presentation, Maria, I don't know if your PhD student is ready, will be given by something really difficult to pronounce, Masni
Madong, yeah, and the presentation.
Yeah, and will be discussed, the discussant will be Emily and Dennis. I have to say that questions are open to everybody from the audience after each presentation. The discussant is just a guarantee that somebody is going to be asking some questions. So please, audience, you are really welcome to participate, asking questions or making suggestions at the end of each presentation. Let's try to keep it short so we don't stay here for 6 hours. So please, Masni, whenever you want, you have your word. You have to share the screen. And let's check if you manage to do it. We'll tell you if we can see your presentation.
Okay. Can you guys see it? I mean, yeah.
Okay, yes, we can.
Yeah.
Please, everybody else, mute your microphones, and I'll also get rid of my video so everything will move softer, faster. Okay. So all yours.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Masni, and today I will be presenting understanding the experience of indigenous minority through the lens of spatial justice, the case of Orang Asli in Peninsular Malaysia. Before I start my presentation today, let me introduce the outline of the presentation today. First, I will introduce the background and context of the research, followed by the concern and challenges that faced by the indigenous population. Next is the objective of the research, and followed by the 3 main factors that consist of education, health, and socio-economic condition. Next, I will present the methodology slide. This continues with the discussion from the lens of spatial justice and the result of the research. And this paper is part of my ongoing PhD research. As quoted by Amartya Sen, poverty is not simply a lack of adequate income. It is a multidimensional phenomena that extend beyond the economic arena to encompass factors such as the inability to participate in social and political life. In the case of indigenous population in Malaysia, majority of the population are suffering from poverty. Indigenous people in Malaysia is known as Orang Asli. Orang Asli contributing to 0.6% of the national population. The Orang Asli of Peninsular Malaysia consists of 18 ethnic subgroups classified under the Negrato, Sonoy, and Proto-Malay. And the distribution of the indigenous population mainly in rural area in West Malaysia. As you can see on the slide, there is the figure one is actually basically is a location of the indigenous population, which is each dot on the maps represent the 100 people of the indigenous people. And you can see number of the Orang Asli village in West Malaysia. There are few concerns and challenges that faced by Orang Asli. The first one is legislation and autonomy. This especially in land ownership and land rights. And the second challenges of the indigenous population is poverty and marginalization. And they also have issue in defending themselves against the current socioeconomic development, like palm oil plantation and logging issue. And as I mentioned before, the indigenous population mainly located in remote area, and they mainly rely on the natural resources such as to build the shelter materials and for herbs and to hunt for food. Yeah. In this paper, there are three main objectives. First, to investigate the multidimensional poverty of Orang Asli in Peninsular Malaysia from the dimension of education, income, health, and living standard. Second, to analyze the life experience of indigenous population through the participatory approach and justify it from the lens of spatial justice. And third, to suggest an alternative policy to improve their socio-economic condition and to suggest a pathway of achieving goal as a framework for addressing Orang Asli standard and well-being. Education factors is very important in developing Orang Asli community, as education can directly impact their employment, health, income, and community welfare. And one of the causes of this high drop rate of Orang Asli children is because they have issue of access to education, such as the lack of infrastructure and resources. For example, like transportation to the nearest school. Because of their remoteness, some children were sent to the boarding school since a very young age. So they're not used to the life in boarding school, and majority of them did not continue into the secondary education. As we can see from the graph, we can see that the number of Orang Asli children that continue to the secondary or high school education is extremely low. The health status of the Orang Asli population is lower than the non-indigenous group in Malaysia. And due to the geographical factor, it is hard for Orang Asli or the indigenous people to access the basic health service provided by the government, because most of the village are located in the rural areas, meaning that the location becomes the barrier for them to access the modern medical facility. Alongside this, the Orang Asli have a strong attachment to their traditional methods. So they would prefer to go to the traditional method rather than the modern healthcare methods. Second is the socioeconomic status. There are around 76.9% of the indigenous population live below the poverty line, and they're experiencing the extreme poverty. And because of their low academic achievement, and this will directly affect their employment opportunity. On the other hand, some of the Orang Asli that stay in a very remote area have problem accessing a pipe water supply, as well electrical supply, housing unit, and roads. In the context of spatial justice and indigenous people, disposition of land and colonization and marginalization. And indigenous people have a very close bond with their customary land. The second slide, in this research, there are direct relationship of the spatial justice and the capability approach. Like in the more recent contribution, by Israel and Frankel have drawn on the capability approach that in order to develop a nation of justice that drive from a person's capability and his liberties. And of course, it is possible to extend this nation of justice by viewing spatial justice as something that reflect a particular place, locality, regions, or states, or capability or liability. And raw principle of justice also supplemented by same capability approach that location should not be dismissed once capability. The next slide is focus group was implemented in the data collection. The interview was done in 2 different villages in Pahang, Malaysia. And Pahang, the reason is like the Pahang region has the highest number of indigenous population in West Malaysia. And total of 6 focus group and 29 participants was involved in the process. And I'm using the interpretative phenomenological analysis IPA to examine the data. From that, a discussion of their past will seek on a comparative basis to identify the shortcomings of the current situation of the indigenous population. From the result, 2 main sources of origin of spatial injustice were identified. The first is the weak of land rights. Orang Asli are currently experiencing issue of protecting their own rights, particularly in relation to land rights. Therefore, they have a very limited access to natural resources. And also the illegal logging activity of private company gain the ultimate benefit from the customary land that belongs to the indigenous population. While private company earn money from those illegal logging, they are also suffering in protecting their traditional land. They are also facing the deforestation issue and pollution that from the illegal logging. And the second point is uneven development. With the geographical condition of the indigenous population, they have limited access to social service, and this will lead to their poor health status and low education achievement and limited job opportunity that are available for them. And even with the capability based on the above are reduced, but these situations are still unequal to other locations. That's all. Thank you for your time. Feel free to ask any question.
Okay, thank you very much, Masni. Maybe we'll open first questions to the audience, and if nobody has any questions, then it would be the time for the discussant to ask or to make any suggestion that she might have. Anybody has any question for Masni?
Can I have Professor Ana?
Yes.
Yes.
Tell me.
Thank you. Thank you, Masni, for wonderful presentation. I'm very happy the way you link it, the capability with the location.
Yeah.
And actually Rawlsian theory of justice. So this is something which actually becomes more meaningful. I was actually just doing, another paper. I think that Ana, I may contribute one paper for you because I was working on the social movement and regional development in India, because social movement strengthens the regions of India. I was just thinking in the same line, because the similar kind of diversity as you have in India, you have in Malaysia. Has there been any, when you link it with the regional development, territorial justice, regional articulation, what you can say, demand for justice, regional demand for justice, the social movement become the prime movement in the demand process. Has there been any such kind of actually emergence of the social movement in Malaysia also? Because in India we have that, a different kind, I mean, that where actually we are trying to link together with the regional development today. Why there is a high literacy rate, why there is a high per capita income, why there is a high entrepreneurship. Somewhere they are linked with the grassroots movement which emerge in those regions. So has this been actually also case in Malaysia, because the two villages you study, whether there is a linkage of some articulation with the regions? Yeah, my question is over, Masni.
Okay. I don't have like a very good like answer for that area that you was mentioned just now, because I'm not familiar with it. But um social movement that happened in the Malaysia, I'm sure that that will be, I mean, in the case of Malaysia, because we are very diverse. But yeah, I think I will look into the I'm sorry that I don't have a very good like answer that I can give you, because I don't have that much like information about that. And yeah, I will, yeah, I will get back to you. I mean that because I don't have like really a very good answer for that. I mean, I don't have really like
It's okay, Masni. You don't have to have answers right now. You just have to try.
Okay.
Any more questions?
Yes, can I ask one question?
Yes.
Well, I wonder if you can put down the sharing of your screen if it is not used now.
Okay, all right.
Because it allows us to see much more people, much more persons, the room. Anyway, my question is, it is the same issue that you raised about the property rights on land. I assume that, and that I think it's a very interesting hypothesis or a question that we should ask in the developing world, really, or in the periphery of the developing world. In fact, or in the developed world. In fact, land is the capital of the rural areas. So if people don't have access to this type of capital, it's difficult to take risks. It's difficult to sell land and move to the town. It's difficult to get out of poverty to some extent. And I think that's for me, it's a very interesting research question, because usually these property rights on land are very much connected with the institutions, both national, that tend to be more, and traditional. And that I think it could be an interesting focus to understand rural poverty and the way people move or don't move. The other point is about integration. So when you talk about an area and you see all these, of course, but this is a European perspective on this richness of multiculturalism that exists in South Asia and in Asia. But for me, will this integration, this diversity without interaction, without marriage, without it will be a limitation to increase the poverty, or at least the poverty of some groups and related to the others. Yeah, finally. Well, I did a study once in poverty, and one was the topic that I found astonishing is that poor are the ones that they think they are poor because not of themselves, because of the others. So that's the denial evidence. And I wonder if we can ask that, because some of these communities are poor, relatively poor, but they think that eventually they can change their own situation if they are able to do it. So that depends on them. And the other type of poverty, eventually more urban, is that people think that it is not their fault. It's the fault of some others. Okay, thank you very much but I think you should, if you want to do a right hypothesis to a test, and then if you have a replicable method, I think, like you have shown, you explain better because each one of us know a set of methods but do not know everything. So if you explain better the method and the method can be replicable, I think it's a very interesting topic. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Tomaz.
Masni, do you feel like saying something to Tomaz? I don't know.
Okay, okay, maybe I should, yeah.
Yeah,
And,
let it pass, let it pass.
Okay, okay.
I have a question for you and then we'll move on to the discussion.
Okay, all right.
It's very straight to the point.
Okay.
Those interviews that you are performing, you're just interviewing people from that minority group, from that ethnic group, or you are just interviewing also people from the village that do not belong to the minority group? Because if a space at the end, what you are trying to prove is that the space, because they live in remoteness areas, is what matters. What you should be interested in remarking is that there are differences between people from that ethnic group and from any other citizenship or ethnic group living in the same village. That's what's important. I don't know if within those 29 interviews, you have people interviewed that are not from the minority group, but living in those villages. Because if the differences in spatial justice regarding the land rights, regarding the access to schooling, the access to social services, the access to wealth services is exactly the same, sorry, but what explains the situation in which they are in is the space, is where they live, not that they belong to the minority group.
Okay.
Masni, your interviews were only of the only indigenous people live in these villages.
Yeah,
Maria, but you get my point, Maria.
Yes.
You are the PhD director, and unless you have the control group, well, space is what might explain their situation, not that they are a minority group.
Only minority group lives in these villages. Yeah, so you would have to have a control group somewhere else in some other.
Exactly. Otherwise, it doesn't make any sense. Otherwise, you could say that everything is because of a space.
Well, you can talk about, Masni, you can answer with discrimination of these children in schools when they are in schools outside. Okay, maybe. Well, that's very good.
Well, Maria, this is just something for her to think about it. This is her PhD thesis. It has to be improved, and that's something that she can add up to the study. Otherwise, she's always going to be criticized in that point. I reckon. I don't know. Yeah, it's still work in progress. That's something that she can still do. Right?
Okay.
Okay, now I think we'll move on to the discussion. Emily, are you there?
Hi, yes, I am. I've got terrible contrast on my video, so you may not see much of my face. Thank you so much, Masni, for that. My comments, I think, tie together a lot of the themes that have come up in questions. So hopefully I can phrase them in a way that might, I don't know, be constructive and kind of tackle some of the queries that other people had. And I think something that I'm going to go backwards from the comments. So just now there was a discussion about method. So when I hear the presentation, I actually think a phenomenological approach is really appropriate because of its emphasis on capturing the experience of deprivation and spatial injustice, right? But it's true that approach doesn't lend itself to thinking through in terms of control groups and hypotheses, etc. So kind of trying to tease out and justify why that kind of epistemological or kind of theoretical stance is the most appropriate way to capture really and emphasize the experience of deprivation and how that relates to space. And I also wondered, and this is my question in the kind of methods part, would be whether through those interviews, in fact, in addition to highlighting experiences of the challenges, you also perhaps encountered, narratives of capability or sites of resistance or strategies or experiences of resistance, because I can imagine that actually these experiences of injustice and deprivation are, intergenerational, they're longstanding, they're endemic. And so I think a lot of the literature on that kind of poverty and injustice and development also draws a lot of attention to capabilities and assets, of people as they generate a way of being in the world that allows them to overcome a lot of the challenges that they face. Which then links, I think, to something that I would see as a great value to add on to the piece, which would be a sense of the kind of policy context and the historical context of the study, because I'd like to know whether there has or have been any policy initiatives to reduce these inequalities, including, for example, to improve access to infrastructure. If not, why? Is this based on prejudice? Is it based on actually systemic and institutionalized preference for certain ethnic groups over others? And if there are some, then can you analyze the logic or the basis? Are they built on the kind of norms and representations that are likely to afford in the future greater access to infrastructure in a way that respects culture and experience? And if they do exist, clearly they're not working, because you still have this big gap between access to certain key services, for example, right? So why are they not working? And then finally, I suppose tying it all up with this notion of really giving a better sense of this case study that very few people outside of Malaysia, I imagine, would know, which is, to give almost a graphic sense of the distances between these villages and access to key things. So I wondered if it would be possible to map or to calculate, average distances to schools or to water or to anything like that, to really give a sense of exactly, the scope and the scale and the nature of this removal from access to key services. So those are the kind of three pillars that I see, but it was very interesting and I look forward to seeing the rest.
Okay. And actually, you was mentioned about the policy context, that is there any policy to tackle the inequality that happened to the indigenous population? Actually, there is, that because there is a policy, especially to help the indigenous population, because, for example, if their government, for example, the state government want to use their lands, and they will provide a resettlement to the indigenous population. But the problem is, when you provide resettlement, housing and everything to the indigenous population, actually at the end of the day, they will not use the housing that provided by the government, because there is not the place they're living in, because they want to stick to the forest, so they will move to another forest, so I think that the plan that they are providing, the resettlement housing, is actually not really helping the indigenous population, rather than just that kind of the loss of their value and culture, because they are very attached to the forest, and they rely mainly on that. And there is when I interview one of the women in the focus group interview, and she was mentioned that actually when she do for example, she do agriculture kind of thing in that land. That land is not something it's not their state land, or it's not their customary land. It's just the land that always there. That in their village, and they are using it for agriculture things, to plant vegetables and all those kind of things. But when the private company, for example, logging company, they just come and they just destroy everything that they've been working on maybe for 2-3 years. So I think that is very sad when I heard that. So I think there might be something wrong with that maybe the policy is there, but the way the policy being implemented to protect their land rights maybe still very weak, I guess.
Yeah, and that's precisely the kind of story that I think would really elevate the analysis, is not just kind of describing the policy context, but also analyzing it in terms of the extent to which it is place appropriate and people appropriate, in which it's not imposed on a people, it is produced with, you know, and it doesn't perpetuate the representations and the kind of injustices that then kind of become entrenched and cause these problems in the first place. So that analysis, I think, would really be very valuable.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Masni. I think we could move on to the next presentation. Paul, are you there? And the discussant of this presentation will be María Plotnikova from Aberystwyth University. Let's hope we understand what Paul has to tell us, because I've heard him many, many times and I still don't get him. So good luck with this, guys. All yours, Paul.
Okay, just to check, is it the accent you don't get or the words?
I still don't know. I'll figure it out.
Okay, right. Well, I'll try and sound professional just in case it's that. Okay, so.
By the way, I was just trying to make a joke, right?
Okay, just before my talk.
Just in case.
Okay, so here we go. Can you see that full screen?
Yes, we can.
Okay, good stuff. Right, so well, I'm going to share the blame for being unintelligible here, because there's three authors for this thing. But so it is quite an unwieldy title, but we're interested in this common focus among many of us on this focus on territorial inequalities within the European Union. And our particular focus is on two different aspects of that. One is to think about how EU agendas relate to the spread of policymaking across different levels, you know, so EU, member state, devolved or regional or local government. But in particular here, we're looking at multi-sectoral policymaking, which is a tendency to divide policymaking into sectors like health and education, and indeed in subsectors, you know, like university, education, or public health. Okay, so I guess it's my job to sort of give a very general sense of what the Imagine project does in general. To be honest, I don't know if, I mean, Ana can correct me, I forget what Imagine stands for exactly, but it doesn't have territorial inequalities in there, but it does have, I think, this focus on the idea of spatial justice. So I've described it there in terms of, there's a general focus on equity in relation to geography. So many of us are not geographers, but we rely on geographical debates and colleagues to keep us right on what these terms mean. So one of them, I think, is fairly clear to most people, you know, reduce unfair inequalities that relate to territories within the European Union, and promote the idea or policy of spatial justice. Okay, so I think that's the context for a lot of the papers that are going on. Okay, and so of course, I mean, part of our aim is to kind of make things seem complicated and unintelligible, because I think that reflects the object of our focus. So it's quite easy to say that we are interested in equity and spatial justice, but very difficult to know how to do that in you know, theory or policy or practice. So you know, the first point there is that there's no overarching reference point within the EU or our professions for, you know, what equity means overall and how things like spatial justice relate to that overall project. Instead, we have lots of different equity projects spread across lots of different levels and types and sectors of government. And even within those sectors or agendas, the meaning of key terms is contested and changes over time. So I think one of the first papers that came out talks about the contested and changing meaning of territorial cohesion, which makes it difficult to know exactly how we fit in. Okay. Now, as I say, our aim is to further complicate things by showing what happens when two other things happen. First is that the responsibility for these types of agendas is shared across many levels of government. So for example, one of our papers was on Scottish government, which is sort of notionally the third level there. And in sectors, and the point would be that each government or each sector has its own frames of reference, its own policy networks and its own ideas. So they might have a common focus on something like spatial justice, but very different ways to interpret. Oh, sorry, I stopped there. I was getting a little bit of feedback there. Is everything okay? Yeah, okay.
Please, somebody had the microphone on. Make sure
okay.
that they are off, please.
All right. Okay. It's just to test my skills. Okay, so let me briefly describe 3 published papers in this project that are relevant to what we're about to explore. So the first 2 papers talk about territorial cohesion in the following ways. So they talk about the tendency for territorial cohesion policy to be quite vague, and for for them to track limited progress over time. And so that's limited economic progress because there are still regional economic disparities according to GDP measures, and limited political progress because a lot of territorial cohesion policy was there to foster or support or defend the idea of EU integration. And so, third, they talk about this search for alternative ways to think about these issues or to do something about them. So one of them that we're talking about in the project a lot is this shift of focus from GDP measures towards well-being measures, or a focus on public services, or a focus on capabilities, that sort of thing. Now, a second paper that was done by Emily and Sean and I is on the impact of multi-level policymaking on such agendas. So in this case, we were looking at gender mainstreaming, and we were finding that it was a different kind of policy focus, but they're very similar issues. So it's a highly ambiguous focus. Essentially, it means everything and therefore nothing. And key actors in different governments were finding that their sense that their approach to equity was incoherent, and they found a lot of silo working, and they found a tendency to decentralize a lot of these policy making. So the interesting thing in some of these strategies.
Molt bé. Bueno, entonces este ya es el que va davant de mí, el Paul Cairney este.
Okay, I think it's Maria now.
Please, somebody from Spain, can you please turn off the microphone? We are listening to you. Go on, please, Paul. Sorry.
Okay, no worries, no worries. If it happens a third time, it was clearly a wind-up, right? Okay, so yeah, so we were interested in potential contradictions between a sort of centralized focus on uniform outcomes and also a tendency to decentralize policymaking to produce lots of different outcomes. So we talk briefly in the paper about 3 common elements to this kind of work as follows. So some papers talk about the fuzziness of these strategies, and we talk about their ambiguity. And what we tend to find is that a very kind of ambiguous policy agenda is really good to generate widespread agreement between lots of people, but it also undermines the delivery of that project. So essentially, you can have lots of people sign up to terms like cohesion or spatial justice, but interpret them in very different ways and can produce very different policy outcomes as a result. Now, the second thing is, it could be that these policies are so vague that they could be contradictory. People could make policies or engage in a form of policymaking with the same reference point, but to produce contradictory practices. So I think the classic in a lot of these strategies is, on the one hand, they have to be highly centralized to produce some degree of uniformity, or something like a race to the top, or a sufficiently high level amongst regions. But a lot of the methods associated with it are decentralized and prompt diversity, with the potential for decentralized processes to produce policy outcomes that contradict the initial aim. And the third aspect that we focus on is this idea that if you try and compare lots of different equity initiatives, we're not sure if they complement or contradict each other, or if they complement or contradict routine government business. And that's the particularly crucial one, because Emily and I have found in other studies of things like early intervention and youth prevention policies, that governments can make very high rhetorical commitments to a strategy, but actually engage in practices that completely undermine it. And they do both of those things at the same time. Okay, so all of that was context for the main focus of this paper, which is to engage with this tendency or sort of slight movement to reframe some of the focus on territorial cohesion in relation to things like equal access to public services. One key measure of regional disparities could be highly unequal access to public services like healthcare and education. Now, the interesting thing there is that each of these public services is associated with its own equity focus. There is a health and all policies focus on health inequalities, and there are equivalent studies in education on equity. And each of those sectors have their own intellectual and policy and practice frame of references. And what we're finding, I think, is that only one of these sectors has a complementary focus, that can tie well with the focus on territorial cohesion, while health doesn't. So let me just briefly go through what health and all policies is, and you can see what I mean. So this is a sort of 5-point common story told of health and all policies, which is a kind of global WHO health strategy supported by the European Commission. Okay, and these are the kind of 5 points that you tend to find in it. First is health is a human right. Second, so what we need to do is identify the evidence of the so-called social determinants of health inequalities. So those are things like unequal levels of income and wealth, employment, high quality housing, environments and such like. Then identify evidence-based so-called upstream solutions. So these are population measures rather than individual or public service measures. And then the fourth point is the crucial one. It says promote intersectoral action and collaborative governance, because people in health and all policies studies suggest that all of the most significant influences on health inequalities are not to do with health services. So essentially, the whole sort of focus in health and all policies, health inequalities literature, is to challenge the idea that you can promote equality or equity via healthcare services. Okay, so there will be a rest of the paper, but that'll be us. That'll be us for now. That is a picture of one of our team who's planned out the rest of the project, and so we'll be happy to take questions or comments on what we've done so far. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Paul. Thanks very much. I can see Tomaz fuming already, full of questions, willing to participate, but I think I'm gonna forbid him. First, let's move on to the audience and then to the discussant. Any questions for Paul, please? Apart from Tomaz. I knew Tomaz. I knew Tomaz. Anybody but Tomaz first, please?
Okay.
No, nobody? Okay, Tomaz, that's all yours.
Okay, thank you. Well, thank you very much for this first part of your paper. I think it's, on one hand, it's very interesting to explain better what are these concepts that's becoming very political, and then of course there is a semantic evolution, and we don't know what they mean. So I think it's very important to clarify this. The other point is that Well, I think the topic is very important, health, equity and health. But I think that if you assume that some public good is for all, controlled by some central government in European government, first of all, it is impossible to fulfill. Second, it is a tragedy of the commons, because you don't respect the idea that the marginal cost equal to marginal benefits. And so I think it will be interesting if you disentangle this accessibility to what type of health service are you providing? It is just personal health, or it is the public good associated with health, or is just the right to live and to live healthy. And this type of entanglements, I think, in terms regarding health, it is very important. And of course, there are many attempts to have eventually a comparative study of different regions or different countries within this framework of COVID. It could be interesting. For instance, in Portugal, we noticed that this idea that all hospitals, all the national service for health is okay, is good, and once you enter the gate of the hospital, you are safe. That's not true, because some hospitals are, even public, are much better than others. Some that eventually were known as very good because they have a good marketing campaign. Somehow they show very, very badly in the terms of mortality rate per number of infected persons. So I think this it will be nice for a journal like ours to have these concepts applied, seen these different concepts applied. And then I think COVID, of course, it is a very interesting, can show up at least the different performance of healthcare service and also the balance between private and public and so on. So, but that's just a suggestion, for sure. It is related to regional development somehow. In fact, I've done a small paper that, for instance, whereas education tends to centralized countries, so in the zip curve analysis, health services are more the outcomes of countries that spend more on health. So somehow the result is more, the zip curve is more flatter, and whereas countries that have more education, that they tend to be more steep function. So the relation with the health expenditure and the distribution of public money is also another possibility. Well, thank you very much, Paul.
Okay, Paul, do you have something to say to that?
I mean, thank you for the comments. That's my main response. I suppose my concern is that if I follow your advice, we're writing a different paper. So it could be that we write the paper we're doing and this one, 2 for 1, something like that. Okay, you give me a lot to think about there.
I guess now we'll move to the discussant, unless there are some other questions for you, Paul. And the discussant is María Plotnikova. María, please.
Thank you, Paul. I appreciate that you're trying to capture a lot of the issues that we have been grappling with in the Imagine project. So it's nice to see that these various aspects are getting integrated. On the other hand, it also brings the complexity into the paper. So I would like to ask why, I mean, because we are just coming in kind of tabula rasa to this paper, and also this not being, let's say, our direct specialization. Is your purpose to compare health and education policy and framework? or is it, or are you using this comparison to elucidate on, let's say, inequalities that that still persist, for example, in health? Yeah. So that would be maybe good to kind of make it clear at the beginning. Then what is the type of evidence that you are applying that you are planning to present? Yeah, these are going to be interviews, or this type of what kind of sort of methods are you using? And yes, we would like to know more about the health in all policy. So you say that the focus is on this kind of macro health determinants. Yeah, why is there not an individual approach, so that maybe individuals are approached on the basis of their specific conditions? So maybe a combination of these approaches would be more successful, or more efficient, and less costly. Yeah. But of course, this interplay between the kind of economic conditions of the localities, yeah, and the ensuing sort of health outcomes is very interesting, because, for example, like Tomaz was saying, and like we all know, that poorer localities are affected more in terms of health outcomes by COVID because because they live in more crowded conditions. They tend to be in front-facing, customer-facing, face-to-face jobs. Yes. So obviously sort of health outcomes are strongly, sort of in a almost Marxist sense, determined by the economy. Yeah. Yeah. So why isn't there? Yeah. Why isn't there this sort of individual focus on the health behavior, and how we could possibly integrate, or how would you suggest maybe integrating yes, kind of more medical approach? Yeah. And also why is it in your opinion, I guess it's a very interesting question, and an interesting answer, why is there no focus on supply, supply of services? So we are talking about the clients, the population, but why are you not seeing the emphasis on the supply, and sort of trying to reform the supply? Of course, it's a sort of a very potentially very politically contentious issues, but I guess that's what you are addressing here. Thanks. Sorry, it's just brief comments, or kind of comments having seen it very recently, your paper. Thanks.
Paul, something to say?
Yeah, thank you. So, I mean, those questions are really helpful in terms of how we think of the framing and how we explain it. So, I mean, I suppose a kind of a subtext, which I agree with, is that the paper is likely going to be too complex. I had that sense when we were trying to write it, actually. If you really struggle to write an introduction, it gives you a sense that the paper is going to be, far too long. So I would take that. I would take that point. So certainly, our purpose is to compare health and education frames of reference, rather than focusing on something more substantive like services. So the type of evidence is we're doing systematic qualitative reviews. So we've done the health and all policies one, and that should be appearing in the Open Research Europe site. And we're in the process of doing the same with education. So essentially, we're covering the literature on these approaches and comparing how they describe things, rather than producing the research ourselves. I mean, probably the biggest interesting question is, why is there no kind of focus on integrating individual lifestyle and medical approaches with this? Now, I think the answer is that almost every public health promotion or improvement study, their first paragraph challenges a focus on individuals and healthcare services. That's the dominant frame of reference within these studies is that too many people focus on individual lifestyles and healthcare services when we should be focusing on social determinants of health and upstream measures. There's a remarkable, what would you call it, coherence among this field in terms of what their focus should be and what their focus should not be, which I think for us is one of the most interesting parts. You know, if you read stuff on territorial cohesion, there may be quite a significant or growing emphasis on equal access to services. But then if someone from that department were to speak with people in public health studies, the first thing they would probably do is have an argument about what their focus should be. You know, so people in public health would say, you know, this focus on healthcare services is inappropriate. So that's one of the things that we are finding interesting when we compare these strategies and frames of reference. They might all be focusing on equity, and they might focus on, you know, regional disparities, but they have very different, often contradictory views on how to do it. Okay, so that's, I mean, all I can say is I think that would be interesting, but I think we'd still struggle with you know, the so what point. You know, so what if we find that lots of sectors have different ideas about what to do? You know, what's next? I mean, I think we would use that to say, well, this helps explain why lots of these initiatives get nowhere, because they're quite ambiguous and they contradict each other, and so it's very hard to be intersectoral and work across lots of departments if those departments have really different ideas about what they should be doing.
At least it would explain the delay in responses, you know, that we have experienced here.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much, Paul. That wealth study is well deserved in Scotland, where I've heard that you have like the worst wealth cases of inequality in Europe, I think. Correct me if I'm wrong, but what's going on in Scotland? That's something that should be like kind of searching deep. Maybe I don't know, the weather? I don't know. You have for sure some keys, but that would be for a coffee conversation more than for a webinar. So now we're moving on to the next presentation, which will be given by our colleagues from Italy. And in this case, no, sorry, the next one will be by some colleagues from Valencia. And Alicia Gómez from the Instituto Valenciano de Investigaciones Económicas will be the one presenting this paper with a French title. We are so international. The discussant will be Esteban Fernández, who I hope everybody is there. Esteban, are you there? Alicia, are you there?
I'm here.
Okay, and Alicia, are you there? Are you ready?
Hi, I'm Teresa, not Alicia, sorry. We have changed the presenter.
Okay, fair enough. Can you share the screen with us? And whenever you can, please.
Okay, sorry. Is that okay?
Yes, perfect.
Yes, okay. Well, I'm Teresa Sanchis. I'm the co-author of Alicia Gómez and María José Murgui from the University of Valencia. And first of all, I will thank to the organizer of this interesting webinar to give us the opportunity to present this research now in progress. Well, as you can see, the title of the presentation, the main motivation of our paper is to study how the Spanish regions have moved in the last 15 years with regard to the European regions, and especially to the leaders regions in Europe, as you can see through the paper. Sorry, I have a problem. Okay. Okay, yeah, I have a problem moving the slides. So in our study, we perform a shift share analysis trying to observe which factors or which more than factors, which elements compose the differences in productivity of the Spanish regions with regard to the European regions, taking as reference only 13 countries, and even to the Ile-de-France, that is, as I have said before, the richest region in Europe at that moment. We decompose it in three components: the within industry component, which refers to distances or differences in technology performance of the regions within the same sector. A labor relocation component that refers especially to moving of labor between sectors and is an element that can help or that can move to convergence or divergence between the regions with regard the referent regions. And finally, we have a between industry component that especially takes the idea of how the regions are specialized with regard to the referent region. So why we do this shift-share analysis? Our idea is that behind these three components, one can find elements that are postulated in the different neoclassical and the different growth theories, the neoclassical framework, or in the new economic geography framework. By some way or another, these three components have one idea exposed in these frameworks that can tell we if the regions can converge or diverge with regard to the region of reference. For example, and the within industry component, the new economic geography tells us that the regions that are better endowed with different assets, such as human capital, infrastructures, the technological capabilities, or even institutions, are better prepared to be more productive, to generate technological change, and this could be an element for divergence. While by the other hand, in this framework, the presence of congestion cost or spillovers is conducive to convergence between the regions. In the same way, the neoclassical, or in the opposite way, the neoclassical framework tells us that diffusion of technology between different regions can make that the regions could converge. When we've put the attention in the labor relocation component, the NEG approach told us about the congestion derived from congestion cost could be an element conducive to convergence between the regions, while the neoclassical framework gives us the idea that movements of factors between different regions looking or seeking for better remuneration are also conducive to convergence. And finally, the between industry component in our study refers to is a residual component that tells that the specialization of the richer regions in the most productive industries are conducting to divergence between the regions with regard to the referent regions. In the case of the new economic geography, those regions better endowed with those factors that are generating technological change usually are those the richer regions and the most dynamic regions are conducing to divergence. So in our analysis, the central idea is to observe the Spanish regions with regard to the European average, the Spanish regions with regard to the Ile-de-France, that is the richest region in our sample of countries, and depending on which component dominates the recent upsurge of inequalities between Spain and the rest of Europe, or Spain and Spain and the richest region in Europe, that is the Ile-de-France, depending on which component dominates recent increase in dispersion or inequality between Spanish regions and the rest, we will have different clues in order to design economic policies to correct these inequalities. This is mainly our central idea. So here we have some, we have the idea of the data we have used. We have the BDIMO-EU's data set. Here you have the reference where we have published the new version of this data set. The variables included there are gross value added unemployment for 10 sectors. This is the level of disaggregation in this data set. We have 156 European regions for 13 European countries, and we have 17 Spanish regions. I'm going to show you some descriptives about how inequality has evolved within Spain, in Spain with reference to the rest of the European regions. As you can see, the pattern of increase in inequality observed in Spain in the last 15 years, since 2000 to 2015, is similar to the pattern observed between the 156 European regions. It's a pattern characterized by an increase in inequality, taking any of the indicators, the coefficient of variation, the TIL indicator, but it has a special characteristic. Well, in red we have the Spanish regions, in blue we have the EU13 regions. Well, this pattern of inequality has a peculiarity, that is that regions tend to be more close to the European average. Regions in the center of the distribution not diverge, converge, but when we take other indicators that take into account other parts of the distribution, for example, the bottom and the top 10 bottom indicator give us the idea that the inequality in Europe has increased. Well, sorry. In this graph, we represent where is Spain or where are the Spanish regions with regard to the rest of European regions. The black dot represent Spain, the green dots represent European regions, the red line represents the European average, and the black line represents the Spanish average. As you can observe, both in per capita, in gross value per capita terms and gross value per worker terms, Spanish regions are for all the period under the average. And the progress is more clear in terms of productivity per worker, where we have got closer to the European average in the last years. Anyway, this is perhaps not the most interesting thing we can observe in this graph, but possibly also that the Spanish regions, even the richest regions in Spain as Madrid or the Basque Country, Navarra, Catalonia, are allocated between the percentiles 50 and 40 along all the period. Only the Basque Country has arrived to the 60 percentile in terms of the gross value per worker in the last year. The same is observed in these graphs, where the kernel density functions reveal that the Spanish regions, that are the shadowed regions, are under or well under the European average in terms of gross value added per capita per worker, and that this has changed a little bit between 2000 and 2015. Well, these graphs represent the same idea. The boxes represent the the central part of the distribution in Spain that is closer. No? European regions are now more close between them than, for example, in 2007. But the richer regions in Spain are getting farther away from the central part of the distribution and are getting closer to the European average. Well, this is the descriptive of the evolution, and now we will try to observe whether this increase or with the convergence or divergence with the European regions along the period is derived from a within industry effect, a labor relocation, or a between industry effect. I'm going quickly. Here we have the composition of the labor productivity effect. We can see that in general, a positive sign, I have to say that a positive sign represents convergence, in this case with the European average. A negative sign represents divergence with the European average. So in general, we can observe that most of the regions in Spain, with the exception of the Balearic Islands and the Canarian Islands, have converged with the European average between 2000 and 2015, and that most of this convergence is derived from the within industry effect, while the labor reallocation and the between industry components are almost insignificant in explaining such differences. Well, we have in this sense convergence with the European average, and this convergence is mainly motivated by a catch-up, a technological catch-up of the Spanish regions with regards to the European average. Things are different when we take a reference the richest region in Europe. The reason why we take a richest region in Europe is because we have observed that when all of Europe or the Europe we have studied that are the 13 European countries, when this is observed in all the set, we observe that in general, European regions tend to converge between them around the average, but we have a handful of very rich regions in Europe, such as Ile-de-France, Stockholm, Hamburg, Groningen, and London, that tend to get farther away from the rest, from the central part of the distribution, and this is the main component explaining the increase in dispersion or disparities in Europe during this period. Okay, so if you observe these graphs, we can say that the divergence in terms of labor productivity with regard to the richest region is in some way different than the increase or the convergence we have observed in the when observed Spain with respect to the European average. Now, the main component explaining the increase in labor distances with regard to the richer region is the between industry component. That is to say that the Ile-de-France is more specialized than the Spanish regions in those sectors that are experiencing a greater increase in productivity. The other components are less significant, and you can say the labor reallocation is almost negligible in the explanation of these movements, and we have some sort of differences, different regions in terms of within industry component. If we look into the within industry component and study it by regions, we can see that the regions that have converged with Ile-de-France are two groups of regions. By one hand are the richer regions in Spain, for example, Navarra, and the very poorest regions in Spain, while the middle income regions diverge with respect to Ile-de-France. So here two ideas that is, here we have, I will return to the previous idea that I was explaining you now, that is the richer regions and the poorer regions are those that converge with the richer region in Europe. Possibly here are two different ideas. One is that the very richest regions in Spain are now taking benefit from investment in more human capital, investment in more infrastructures, and is closing the wider gap they have with the richer region, while the middle income regions that don't have more opportunities to converge in this sense are more stopped in this process. So if we look inside the sectors, we can observe that divergence in terms within industry component is mainly explained by divergence with respect to Ile-de-France in manufacturing, in IC services, in finance, and in professional services. Among all of these elements, or all of these sectors, it's very important to put or to outline that the divergence is very clear in those sectors more related with new technological changes, for example, the IC services or the manufacturing. Although you can say me that in manufacturing we have a lot of sectors, and in a second step I will disentangle that for you. So with respect to the between industry component, we can observe that the divergence is mainly explained by a higher specialization of the Ile-de-France in the IC sector, in the IC services. It's not clear here in the IC services, in finance, in real estate, and this is more or less related with the characteristics that the most progressive services tend to concentrate in the biggest, on the largest cities, where they can take advantage of more element related with agglomeration. And something similar we can say with respect to the proof services, or something similar with real estate. Contrarily, the negative sign in the case of the agriculture, that also is indicating divergence with respect to Ile-de-France, possibly responds to other kind of motivation, responds to a bigger specialization of the poorest regions in Spain in the less productive sectors that are losing productivity with regard to the France average in terms of productivities, the way we have constructed the shift share analysis. So in general, you can see, we have found that Ile-de-France is more specialized than the Spanish regions in those sectors that are more directly related with the new technological change, as the IC services, professional services, or finance, but we don't know what happens inside manufacturing. In order to observe what has happened in manufacturing, we have descended to a lower level of disaggregation, and we consider the following sectors: the food industries, the chemical and fuel refining, IC industries, and equipment, electrical equipment, transport equipment, and other manufacturing. And then we have identified technological change in the IC and services and industries, and to observe which regions are more specialized in those sectors, we have constructed location indexes. For that, we have made this exercise taking all the Spanish regions, taking Ile-de-France, and here I summarize for you the level of the specialization of the most richest regions in Spain with regard to the rest of Spain, and the specialization of Ile-de-France with regard to total France in terms of IC industries, IC services, and professional services. As you can observe here, we find that where is more clear the specialization of Ile-de-France with regard to the rest of France is inside the IC services, but we don't find nothing special in terms of the IC industries. If you observe here, we compare the richest regions in Spain, that is Madrid, and the richest region in France, Ile-de-France. We find that Madrid, that is the richest region in Spain, has more or less followed a similar pattern of specialization than Ile-de-France. Both have similar levels of specialization in IC industries, are more specialized in services than in industries, and in IC services than in IC industries, where it seems not to have been specialized, none of the two central regions in Spain and in France. And but we have a problem in Spain when compared with Ile-de-France, that is that our richest region, that is Madrid, is far below Ile-de-France in terms of labor productivity in any industry, and that the distance between Madrid, for example, and Ile-de-France has increased along this period in the most relevant components related with technological change, that are the within industry component that represents technological catch-up, or the between industry component that represents specialization or de-specialization in the most productive sectors. Well, finally, some conclusions. So in this paper, we find that since 2007, regional inequality has increased in Europe, propelled mainly by the impulse of a handful of very dynamic regions. Among them is Ile-de-France. This movement has affected the position of the Spanish regions in Europe. We find that they have, the Spanish regions have converged with the European 13 average, mainly driven by a within industry effect. These are good news in terms of policy cohesion effectiveness, because the improvement in regional endowments of factors such as human capital, infrastructure, potential to develop R&D has propelled an increase or convergence of the Spanish regions with the European average, but it has a danger because we find that only the income regions, the very high income regions and the very low income regions in Spain have converged, but the medium are diverging. So we need to design to implement more selective policies in order not to lose more positions for these middle income regions in Spain. And when we took the reference of the richest regions in Europe, we find that the conclusion as the Spanish regions have diverged, all the Spanish regions, with no exception, have diverged with the richest region, with the most dynamic, Ile-de-France, that this divergence is mainly driven by the between industry effect that tells that Ile-de-France is more specialized than Spain in the most dynamic services and industries, but also divergence is with France for most of the regions in Spain is driven by a within industry effect that is tell us that the technological distance between Spain or the Spanish regions and most of the Spanish regions and Ile-de-France is increasing in this last period. Here the question is, or the signal we find here is possibly those factors more related with the agglomeration, such as the size of the market, the access to the worldwide through the infrastructures more developed than Spain, major access to the advantages derived from globalization for a city like Paris are benefiting more the French capital than the Spanish regions or the richest regions in Spain. And this is very worrisome for Spain because we have observed in this paper that all the richest regions in Spain are below the percentile 60 in Europe, are very far from the leader or any leader in Europe, and elsewhere all they have diverged with Ile-de-France in terms of the within industry and the between industry that are those components more directly related with the idea of technological change. So this is all we have done until now. We hope to improve the paper, and we are waiting for all your comments in order to get ideas that can help us to improve the paper. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Teresa. Is there any question from the audience before Esteban acts as discussant? Questions? I have one question for you guys. I have one question for you. If there's nobody from the audience, I have a question for you. I really liked that part where you compare Madrid with Paris, well, Ile-de-France, and saying that you detected some similar patterns of specialization. So I have a question very straightforward for you. Have you thought about writing another paper, but just focusing on the capital cities of the European countries to check their patterns of specialization, and if the big metropolises are converging indeed?
Thank you, Ana. We don't have thought until now in these terms, but I think it's a very attractive idea. In fact, one of our concerns is about the impact of some sort of elements related with agglomeration that are putting in advantage not only the richest regions in Europe, but the richest countries in Europe. So if these richest areas in Europe with more possibility to take advantages of agglomeration and globalization are moving this divergence not only between regions, are also moving more divergence between countries in Europe. So as a country, as Spain that has no region in this group of leaders in Europe, I think that if the driver of the actual divergence in Europe is related with this sort of agglomeration economies that are operating at a global level, we are in a very disappointing and worrisome position with regard with the rest of Europe, and so the new wave of inequalities is not only making us more unequal inside the country, but also we are getting part of the poor, the less dynamic regions in Europe. That's for the one hand, but when we have disentangle this composition of the manufacturing, for instance, or the services, the pattern is not so different between Madrid and Paris, and this is another question to study, because we are getting getting closer to that, but I think that is a question of level, no, of size, possibly. Why we don't grow so rapid as Paris, or Madrid doesn't grow so rapid as Paris, is a question of size that is difficult to resolve. No? I don't know really if I have an answer to your question.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else?
I just want to, sorry. This analysis is very interesting, relating the divergence with the sectoral structure of each region. But Spain is very much agriculture, and agriculture policy is common to the European Union. I wonder if you could connect these two, these divergent and convergent with the agriculture sector, and if so, eventually ask the question whether the European Common Agriculture Policy works against the European cohesion policy. And I think that's these special dimensions of European policy, of the two main European policies, could eventually have at least a question in or an hypothesis coming out of this paper.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Tomaz, for your comments. I not agree totally with you with regard Spain is an agrarian country. Spain is more agrarian than other European countries, but we have regions like Madrid that where agriculture really represents a minimum part of total gross value added. Also other regions like Catalonia or for instance, the Basque Country and other parts of the country, or other regions, no? So I think that if we look into that, possibly, I'm thinking in terms of the components of divergence, when compared with Ile-de-France, possibly the fact that we are more specialized in a sector less dynamic, such as the agriculture, is moving this divergence with the most advanced region. But when we look in terms of the European average, this is not there is no problem with agriculture. We don't have a problem of divergence in terms of derived from the presence of agriculture. And I think that the agrarian policies are helping to convergence of the less dynamic regions in Spain and are summing to convergence with the European average. In this sense, I consider that agrarian policies are working okay in aggregate terms.
Okay, thank you very much. Esteban, whenever you want. Esteban Fernandez.
Hi, here. Can you hear me well? Because my Wi-Fi is not great. So, well, if you don't hear me, just shout or do something. Okay, so thank you, Teresa, for your nice presentation. I was just taking some notes just to say something sensible, but some of my comments, my suggestions or on questions were partially addressed in your final slides with your concluding remarks. Because one of the things that I was thinking, even when the paper is very interesting itself, I was wondering about the policy implications that your results suggest. So in other words, how this can be useful for a better design of regional policies if we want to promote convergence. Okay, so this is something that you mentioned almost explicitly in your last two slides, if I remember correctly. But I think I was missing at the beginning, and this is somehow related to the methodology that you are using in your analysis. I'm not familiar with this very specific Sifser equation that you are using. I am more or less familiar with the general Sifser equation, but it seems that it has been specifically designed to address issues as the ones that you were studying on your paper. But I was wondering if you want to give an answer to this identification of potential causes for the divergence, to which extent it would be possible just to have a more, how shall I call it, traditional regression analysis on which you explain the gap of the regions with respect to something. I don't know if the average or something, let's say, more distributional in terms of quantile regression or something like that, by explicitly identifying as regressors the type of regional assets that or to which you were paying attention. Because for me, it's not clear how can you jump from your empirical results to the conclusions in terms of which are the main driving forces behind this specific behavior of the Spanish regions. Perhaps it's something implicit there. It depends on the methodology, but sorry, I missed that one. Another thing I was thinking, perhaps it would be useful just to describe a bit what has been the general scenario for the period. If I got it correctly, it was from 2000 to 2015. So what is the general process of the European regions on this? So, for example, if you could conduct some very simple sigma convergence analysis, for example, just to know if it is the case that Spanish regions are special on that, or it has been well, what happens with the set that you have been analyzing in the European Union have been diverging. Okay, so this would help, I think, to identify if what is happening with the Spanish regions is something very specific, or is because, well, we are within this general process of divergence. So in this respect, Spanish regions are no different to, let's say, Portuguese regions, for example, if you compare it with your reference. And finally, something very specific, when you calculate these location coefficients or quotients, just to understand what are the differences in specialization in, let's say, Madrid compared with Ile-de-France, you take as reference the country. And I was thinking if it could make some sense, just take as reference the whole European Union, because I was thinking, okay, if Paris is managing to attract a lot of activity, not only from France but from other territories, so it's not only specialized in terms of France itself, but in the European Union, or something equivalent to Madrid. This could help you to understand better, I think, this process of larger or smaller specialization. But this was something that came across as I saw your formula, and I'm not sure if I got it right or if it makes any sense. Anyway, this is just food for thought, so I don't expect a quick answer if you don't have. And perhaps I'm not sure of suggesting something really meaningful. But thank you for your presentation again, Teresa.
Thank you, Esteban. Thank you, Esteban, and I'm very glad about your comments, because even my English has been very bad at the beginning. I think that most of the caveats we have in mind and now have arrived to your mind too, and the three questions you have posed now are in our mind too. For example, when you told me about the traditional, why not to make a traditional analysis based in a regression analysis, is what is the next we are thinking for another paper, and we have developed this paper in terms of, well, we are going to identify, first we want to know where is Spain with regard to the other regions in Europe, which is the position of the Spanish regions with regard to other regions in Europe, with regard to the largest or the richest regions, because we have identified that these regions are making a difference with the rest of Europe when we talk for all the European regions, and we have found that we can look into or to look underneath, you know, the industry, the productive structure of the European regions to obtain some clues about what is happening. No? This is the main target or the primary target of this paper, but we consider it as a step to go to another position where we can identify the problem. We can look for the factors that can explain this problem. No? And we want to construct an econometric analysis that gives us a more solid hypothesis to test. And the other element is the general scenario about making a sigma convergence, beta convergence, where are the Spanish regions in this process, in this convergence for all the Europe. So we are making that also. We have some graphs, but we have not present here, and are not too solid, but we can use them and we can explore more this idea. And finally, the idea of the location coefficients. Now we have made the location coefficients using national offices information, because when we are working with data sets for all the European regions, we only have manufacturing. We don't have the composition of manufacturing in more industries. So we have taken data from the INSEE for France, from other sources for Spain, but in the aggregates data sets, we don't have manufacturing decomposed in several industries. For that, we will need to look into the specific offices of the different countries, I suppose. But it's a problem. It's a problem, and it's a problem that I think we have to think more, because, as you say, the specialization of France in, for example, the IC industries, that is very outstanding, no? Has to do with globalization. If we think in terms of globalization, we have to think in terms of all European area as a unique area. No? So I think we will have to work more hard in order to take data for all the countries with this level of disaggregation, to look into this part of the paper. And thank you very much for your comments.
Okay, thank you very much, Teresa. Thanks, Esteban. And next, that's Domenica Panzera and Alfredo Cartone. Regional inequalities, spatial dependence, and proximity structures. Are you there, Domenica and Alfredo?
Yes, yes.
The discussant will be Alicia Gómez-Tello, that maybe Teresa is going to substitute her, right? Who's going to be the discussant?
Alicia.
Very good, Alicia. So you are there as well. So Domenica, whenever you can.
Okay, could you see my slides, my presentation?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. And today I'm going to present a work dealing with the regional inequalities, spatial dependence, and proximity. This study is in collaboration with Alfredo Cartone and Paolo Postiglione, and is being funded by the European Commission within the Imagine project. I will start by introducing the main motivation of our work, and then I will discuss the introduction of spatial dependence into traditional measures of regional inequality. So then I will discuss the relationships between proximity and spatial dependence. And all these topics will be illustrated in an empirical analysis that will be presented by Alfredo. The Imagine project has among its main objectives the analysis of territorial inequalities and the use for this kind of analysis of spatial tools. So in this study, we aim at analyzing economic inequalities in EU, choosing as level of analysis the next 3 regions. And we also aim at assessing the relationship between regional inequality, spatial dependence, and proximity. Proximity relationships between regions are usually represented by a square matrix, the W matrix, with entries expressing the strength of the interactions between regional units. This matrix could be specified using a number of different criteria, as for example, the physical distance, but also the economic or the social distances. So we can use different definition of proximity, and this definition of proximity, this different definition of proximity could influence the amount of spatial dependence that we detect between regional units. In fact, spatial dependence could be defined as the similarity among values that are observed for a given variable between neighbor regional units. So different definition of proximity could influence spatial dependence, and spatial dependence could influence regional inequality. In fact, in the presence of positive spatial dependence, we have that similar values tend to cluster together. So it is evident that spatial dependence could impact on the distribution, on the geographical distribution of economic figures, as for example, GDP. Despite its relevance, the spatial dependence effect has been mainly discarded in traditional measures of regional inequality. Some exceptions can be found in the recent literature. Specifically, we refer to the study proposed by Ray Smith and to our recent study. Both these studies introduced a decomposition of a traditional measures of inequality as the Gini index of inequality into 2 different components that are a spatial component and a non-spatial component. The spatial component refers to the inequality, to the component of inequality due to the spatial dependence effect, while the spatial component refers to the specific component of inequalities, that is the inequality that is due to specific characteristic of regions rather than by interactions between regions. The study proposed by Ray Smith focus on the Gini index expressed in its relative mean difference form. This index compares the value of GDP between between any pairs of regional units. And Ray Smith proposed decomposing this index into 2 components. The first component, the first term on the right side, is the neighbor component. The second one is the non-neighbor component. As you can see, the first component, that is the neighbor component, compares the values of GDP per capita that are observed on neighbor regions that are identified by WYJ, the entry of the W matrix. While the second term considers the differences between the values of GDP that are observed for non-neighbors units that are identified by 1 minus Wij. This second component, the non-neighbor component, will be interpreted as the spatial component of inequality, because this component increases when the difference between non-neighbor observation increase, and then when decrease the difference between observations in neighbor regions. Conversely, the neighbor component could be interpreted as the non-spatial component or the specific component of inequality. In our proposal, we consider the Gini index expressed following the covariance-based formula that is equivalent to the other expression of the Gini index. And following this expression, we consider in the numerator the covariance, so the correlation between the GDP value and the rank that is assigned to this variable. And we proposed decomposing the Gini index in a spatial Gini index and a non-spatial Gini index. In the spatial Gini index, we compare the value of GDP in a given region with the rank that is assigned to the average GDP that is observed for neighboring regions. And the non-spatial component, GNS, is derived as the difference between G and the spatial Gini, GS. In both this approach, the matrix W has a crucial importance. And so we need to pay attention at the criteria that are used to define these metrics. And we can use different criteria to define W. And if you consider, for example, the classification proposed by Gettys, we can use a topological point of view that implies defining a proximity matrix that is based on a particular configuration of the spatial units. An example is the matrix based on the number of nearest neighbors or on the length of the common borders. We could also consider a theoretical point of view that implies defining a proximity matrix based on some exogenous criteria, as for example, given distance functions. Or again, we can consider an empirical point of view that implies defining a proximity matrix that is based on the spatial associations that are detected for the variable under study. In our study, we will apply both of the described approach, and we will use different definition of proximity in applying these both this decomposition. And we will consider value of GDP per worker that are observed on EU NUTS3 regions over the period 2001-2019. Now I will stop my screen sharing and Alfredo will illustrate our main empirical results.
Wait a second.
What's going on?
What? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, maybe Domenica, you can go on because I have some problem with sharing.
Okay.
I think we're the thing. Yeah.
I will try to
follow.
follow.
It's basically the same
Okay.
file, I think. Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry for this. So when we turn it to the empirical analysis, we trying to get into an analysis that facing a fine spatial scale. So we really wanted to evaluate the important relevance of the spatial structure into the sort of indicators telling us what is the extent of the impact of dependence into concentration measures. So after that, we that's why we choose for 1300s not 3 regions. And what we go is trying to evaluate different those 2 different indicators, the range limit options and the one presented by Domenica in a recent paper from Social Indicator Research. And we try to test, to some extent, those indicators for different contiguity structures. The main choice about trying to cope this problem of proximity structure was because all the time when we talk about spatial econometrics and spatial statistics, we are into this W problem. We really wanted to say what is the change? Is there a main change where we choose for different contiguity structures for those indicators? And so we tried for kappa k nearest neighbors. So assuming contiguity metrics that try to address contiguity for the 5 nearest neighbor, the 10 nearest neighbors, and 25 the nearest neighbors. Well, we tried for different options. And then we try more classical, to some extent, proximity metrics based on the inverse of the distance. And also we try to follow a path pointed out by Geddes, trying to use for the entries of the weight matrix the connectivity based on other measures in terms of local correlation structures. And after that, we go into the basically compute what is the Gini index over time. So we do it for a time span quite long. We start from 2001, 2019, and we see that basically is what we have in the last report that we delivered for the Imagine project. We have those slight decreasing inequality during years, but this information is what we have basically in when we do not consider any difference between the spatial and non-spatial parts. So we have those not-street inequality that is slightly going down. And the first option we go for is the range made 2013, and we see that basically here we have quite stable over time path in terms of the ratio between the spatial and non-spatial part. We have this 99% ratio, which is quite high in terms of the spatial part compared to the non-spatial part. And we have it, we see here that it's basically the same over time, 2001, 2019, we have it quite exactly at the 4th digit, the same percentage. And we see that basically the spatial part is going much more important over time, and it's quite stable. And after that, we go for trying to assess what is the what are the results in terms of the measure, the concentration measure that we have in the indicator by Paolo and Domenica. And we see here that this decomposition is given quite different pictures, both in terms of absolute figures. For the same years, we see here that the ratio is basically lower, but also it's giving us a little bit of more information over time. So we see here that the ratio is steadily going down. We start from 0.84 for 2001, and we go through saw that it's under the 80% in 2019. So we see that this ratio is steadily going down. So it's sort of giving us more information in spite of the range mean indicator, which tells us that basically is the same. This ratio is the same over time. And we also, over here, we start to see like, we have those ratio, the spatial non-spatial part here, and compared to the overall indicator over time, and we see it for the 5 nearest neighbor, the 10 nearest neighbor. So the first matrix is telling us that we consider dependencies in the 5 regions closer to each one. So we basically say that the trends are quite the same. So if we see the path of those lines going over time, we see that for a contiguity k-nearest neighbor at 5 and 10, we have basically the same, but we also see some differences here. For the 25, we see that the range is a little bit narrow. And so we see that as a general result, without giving a lot of comparison at this point, at this stage, we see that the spatial components show a general decreasing trend when we adopt this Panzera and Postiglione indicators for this gamma. The contribution of those spatial components, of course, increases over time, and this is quite a result. And the general decreasing of the overall equality is mainly due to the decreasing of the spatial components. So we have the general indicator is going down because the spatial part is going mainly down, which masks a little bit the increasing part in the overall, in the non-spatial part. So we have those different tendencies, and the non-spatial part is giving the major part of the effect on the overall indicator. But I think that this is the main results from in terms of our starting point. We see here that we have 3 different proximity structure, and we have also that we have a nearest neighbor 5, nearest neighbor 10, and 25. And we see here that we have sort of stable results for different contiguity structures. So we have basically, again, the same information when we consider different and different the spatial and non-spatial part when we use the range indicator here in the first column A. And when we turn to this other indicator by Panzera and Postiglione, we see that the picture is quite different, because we have that this ratio is changing when we consider different proximity structure. So a little bit of the same results we have when we use the inverse distance weight matrix, where the elements are the inverse of the distance, the Euclidean distance between the 2 regions centroids. And of course, in this case, we do not appreciate significant difference with respect to the specification of W based on nearest neighbor criteria. So we have the same results. So we have a major, we have stability in terms of those ratios when we consider the range mean, and we have the basically a slight change when we use the other indicators that we see here. And again, we have that the spatial part is given our negative trend, and the idiosyncratic, so the non-spatial part is a little bit increasing over time. So as it is an ongoing project, I have to say, so this is seems to be sort of a methodological paper, but it's a lot about application, because it's telling us what is the meaning in terms of the final results and computation we have of those impacts of this contiguity matrix that we all the time use in spatial econometrics and spatial statistics configuration. And as it is an ongoing project, further idea will be to use proximity structure based on what we know from local indicator of spatial association, in this case exhibited by the gross domestic per capita per worker of several regional units. And this is mainly an idea that we have in Geddes and ALSA 2004 that proposed to use the local Geddes node, the G-star local statistics, so that this indicator allows us to assess the existence of spatial association between neighbors units, so that we have positive values indicating a spatial clustering of high values, while the negative is going like clustering of low values. So one idea could be to use those kind of structure to develop other contiguity and connectivity structures, and try to understand if a major change on those structures is telling us, is giving us a change in terms of those concentration measures when we consider spatial dependence. And of course, this is a main idea that we have for the G-star, the Geddes node. But of course, we can think of it about other local LISA indicators, local indicator spatial association to use in the future. So this is basically what we would have as a rough picture of our idea to use for contiguity matrix, those kind of indicators, so that we can try to cluster on a very sparse matrix before considering the effect of spatial dependence on those concentration measures. And basically, I think we over. I would like to thank a lot of, okay, this is the main conclusion we have here, but the main results should be quite clear, I have to say, so that we have that basically all the indicators seems to confirm a relevance on the spatial dependent part. When we consider the range meet, we have a great larger influence in terms of the spatial part, and this spatial part is not changing over time. And when we consider different structures in terms of contiguity, we have those slight changes when we consider the spatial part calculated on the decomposition on the ranking covariance used by Domenica and Paolo. And when we have, of course, we have other idea to consider in the future, try to go a little bit beyond those classical way to structure the contiguity matrix or inverse instance of contiguity. And of course, that I think we are over. And I would like to thank Ana and Thomas for organizing this webinar. It's really interesting, and all questions are very welcome. Thank you.
Okay, Alfredo, thank you very much to you indeed, and to you and Domenica. Before Alicia has the right to speak out, I would like to ask the audience if there's any question for Domenica and Alfredo. Any questions, suggestions?
Can I make a couple of questions, Ana?
Of course.
Okay, thank you.
Yes,
hi, Domenica and Alfredo. Nice to see you, even with my screen. Yeah, very nice paper. I like it a lot. And I have a couple of, I don't know if I should call it questions, but curiosities, let's say. I was wondering if you, because I was thinking, okay, what are the policy implications of your results? Okay, how this measure of inequalities connected with the spatial proximity can help us to understand this broad phenomenon of inequality. And I was thinking that sometimes when you have an economic issue that you suspect that is, let's say, contaminated by some spatial dependence, well, what you did is an approach is one possibility. Another possibility is trying to get rid of this spatial dependence by means of, for example, applying some spatial filtering. In other words, you filter by using some spatial analysis your data, and once you get rid of all this spatial dependence, you analyze wherever, in your case, inequality. And I was wondering to which extent your approach is similar to this. And I was also thinking, okay, well, if we analyze inequality for a set of regions, let's say, the thing is that most of this inequality is within regions, not between regions, right? So at the end of the day, I mean, what you are focusing is in how this spatial dependence affects to a relatively minor part of inequality, of individual inequality, I mean. So I think, I don't know, I think you need to motivate perhaps a bit more that you are just focusing on that specific part, right? Because otherwise you can have the feeling that, okay, well, who cares if I have some spatial dependence there, because this is almost nothing. What it matters is what is happening within the regions. So okay, I don't give a shit about it, okay? And just one final thought, but I'm not sure of this. And particularly about the formulas that you're using, Domenica. I think what you're doing is really smart in terms of your definition of this spatial part of the Gini coefficient. But I was wondering, just because your non-spatial component is defined by difference, would it be possible, I mean, theoretically possible, that the non-spatial component on your Gini is negative? I guess that the answer is no, but I don't know if you check that.
Yes.
You go, Domenica. I can answer about filtering, maybe.
Yes.
I can answer about it, but of course, if you want to answer to the other question, then maybe.
Okay, I will try to answer, and then if Alfredo wants to add something. So about policy implication, our measure and also the composition proposed by A. Smith. So in general, the spatial decomposition of inequality give us information about a component of inequality that is due to the spatial dependence and a specific component of inequality. I think that in a policy, from the policy point of view, it's more relevant to consider the idiosyncratic component of inequality. So the specific component of inequality to with the purpose of apply some place-based policies that are more clear when we consider the specific component of inequality. So you can have more information about the specific inequality in the place, in a specific place. So the policy could benefit from this decomposition. About spatial filtering, yes, it could be a good idea. We can use also this kind of approach. We can try to use also this kind of approach. Alfredo maybe is more expert.
I think, Esteban, I think this is really interesting because if we are really interested about the idiosyncratic component, we can consider the spatial dependent as a nuisance. So we can, using a decomposition or a filtering, like try to the noise from the spatial part, could be basically the same results, and it will be at least theoretically. So it will be interesting to see what will be the results in terms of application, because but in this approach, what we have, I think to some extent more than the filtering part, considering as a nuisance, that we try to quantify the both parts. And when I'm thinking about when you both Gates and Griffith filtering, but also considering as a other kind of model and the reduced, we can also always consider those filtering as a nuisance. So in this case, we have a quite easy approach to quantify, but it will be really also interesting to see comparison between the this kind of approach and especially filtering approach. And in terms of policy, and I think that the idiosyncratic part, I always think of it like, what will be the situation if this region will be like completely out of space? So this is basically what is the effect of being far in a, let's say in a, what is the effect for Sicily of Calabria, of course, for being at the end on the southern part of Italy? So what will be the situation if we filter out the spatial part, and will be like better, worse, something like that? Could be this policy implication, could be in this kind of direction. So trying to maybe trying to highlight what is the effect of those contiguity relationship. Let's say a region that is giving employees to other regions, or maybe getting import or export to other connected regions, or other effects like bad neighbors effect, something like that, that we have embedded in the sort of spatial dependencies. And this is also a reason why we wanted to try for different contiguity structures, but because we have this idea that if there could be a sensitivity for those indicators of different structures, and this is changing a lot of the results. Maybe this could be not very good in order to see the robustness to different structures to some extent.
And about the composition, the within and the between the composition, it is a future in our plan to make future research on this decomposition of both the spatial and non-spatial component into between and within to account the contribution of intra-regional and inter-regional inequality. And finally, about our decomposition, we have that the spatial component could range between minus the global G to plus the global G. So it could be negative or positive, like a normal index of spatial autocorrelation. While the non-spatial component could be range between 0 and WG, 2G. So it is not negative. It could not be negative, the idiosyncratic component. Okay.
But thanks, Silvana. Your question, there was a lot to think about, I have to say.
Okay,
Thanks
great.
for comments.
Okay.
Are you well served, Esteban? Are you happy with the answers?
I'm never happy. I'm never happy, but let's take it as good. No, thanks.
I was just thinking something. Really, don't answer me. But if the government cannot do anything about proximity, if you define proximity with the 0 ones with the nearest neighbors, either 10 or 5, so policy implications is that there's nothing you can do about proximity. So maybe we should start questioning ourselves about how to measure proximity. And I know that we can get into a really, really difficult arena because that means roads, timing, and things like that. But if the spatial component is strong enough for inequality, the government could do something about proximity. Proximity could be reduced or amplified. So in this discussion about proximity, which is what you're doing in this second part of the paper, that should be something to think about. And something else regarding this as well. If you go local, the best way from my point of view for measuring like the connections between municipalities, and Esteban for sure knows what I'm gonna say, could be commuting data between municipalities. There you are. How many percentage of people move from here to there? Here you have the proximities, how municipalities interact with each other. We can talk about people, so that will be commuting. And if you move into companies, that will be more difficult. But if the article is about discussing these measures of proximity, which is what you did in some part, those are topics that should be introduced or could be introduced, but you don't need to do it in this paper at all. That's very well the way it is. Did you copy me? Kind of made sense?
Yes, I think that commuting, the problem about commuting data is, I mean, it's an actual problem, but I think that once we could, retrieve data about commuting, this is a very reliable indicator that could be considered in the connectivity, because let's say people is bringing those spatial effects across borders. I mean,
yeah, but in that case you can only do it for one country, otherwise you will go crazy, right?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, those are routines running for days and days over.
So now I think it's going to be Alicia, the one acting as a discussant.
Yes.
Alicia, are you?
Hello, everybody. I would like to share some Could you see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Yes.
Okay, I go directly to the comments. So thank you very much for this nice presentation. I divide my comments in two parts, one more technical, so they're more about discussion. So let's start by the technical comments. One first, well, the result is that Gini coefficient decreases, and your objective is to study which part is depend of spatial dependence and which is not a spatial dependence. And you have like two indicators. For me, it's more interesting this second one. Let's see why. So using Ryan Smith, you find that the effect of neighboring region is 0 all the period you study. You say that the non-neighbor is like the spatial component, okay? So this is the non-spatial component, but at the end, this is the neighbor. So it's also like networking is, for me, it's also a spatial effect. Okay, so this is a little string that is so small. On the other hand, using Panzera and Postiglione 2020, for me the results are more interesting, and you find that the spatial component decreases as Gini, okay, while the non-spatial is constant. So I would like to know if there is a possible intuition, economic explanation behind this, why this decreases and this not. Okay, and then you represent in graph what is the relative importance of each component, and you find that the spatial component decrease the relative importance, and on the other hand, the non-spatial component increase the relative importance, although this is much more important. Okay. Also, if there is any intuition, explanation of this, and how the economic crisis 2008, 2012, 14 can affect this, because I detect in this graph that this affect, but not in this non-spatial, the relative importance of the non-spatial. Okay. Then, when you study the local spatial association, the indicator that I know that is in progress, the exercise you do with a map, I am not familiar with this, sorry, but I understand that you find a spatial clustering, high, low, and not significant. I would like to know if it has sense when appears only one region, okay? Because if this is a cluster, for me, it's strange that it's only one region. It's not the common thing is a group of regions. I have, I think, here the map is here. But for instance, here in Spain, you find this red one that is Soria, that at the beginning it does seem a very large productivity here. Can be the effect of Madrid, but why here in Soria and not in others? But my question is, if it has sense that if this is a like network effect that has only appeared one region here, one region here. Okay. Yes, and also considering this other method, it's possible that you use this information for the future. I don't know if it is possible. You use this information in order to construct your weight matrix and to compute here the Gini indexes. Okay, that it can be interesting. Then this is more technical comments, and now more about discussion, the policy implication that you already comment. And other thing can be the new social situation. As you know, since some decades ago, the negative effect of distance has disappeared due to the new technology and so on. And now, currently, that to travel is very difficult, and virtual meetings is like the top. What do you think? What do you think we can create new wage matrix with this new situation? Do you think that what is now the importance of distance disappears more or not? It can be an interesting also issue. And finally, I think that it would be nice to do your exercise, but for different countries. Okay, as was commented before, one of the implications of economic theory is that in the European Union, we find more convergence among countries, but within the countries, we find more divergence. So it can be interesting to do your exercise in some countries, not all, but in some countries, and could be interesting to see what happened with the economic integration. Okay, so these are my comments. You can answer some of them. Or...
Okay. About the more technical questions, so about the trends that the Gini coefficient exhibited in the Ray-Smith indicator, in the Ray-Smith decomposition, is the spatial component that is about 99% of the total. So we have that there is no, according to that indicator, there is not a big variation across time, but the main component is always the spatial component. We found a similar result, but we have our measures better captures the variation in both the components. So we have that our non-spatial component is about constant across time, but the interesting is the relative contribution of the spatial with the non-spatial with respect to the total. And we can see that that contribution is increasing. So it means that we have a decreasing inequality, global inequality. We have a decreasing contribution of the spatial component, but we have an increasing contribution of the non-spatial one. So it means that we have more idiosyncratic component of inequality across time. And so we have the spatial component decreases and masks the increasing contribution of the non-spatial component. And then about, I don't remember the third questions in your presentation.
Yes, it's about if the result you graph, you detect in the graph, if this network high, low, not significant, if it is possible to add this in the weight matrix.
Yes, it's our idea is following the idea of Gettys-Alstad to try to introducing in the weight matrix these differences about local spatial association. So is our idea to develop this kind of metrics based on local spatial associations.
Okay, which one variable?
The variable is the same that we have considered in the Gini.
Basically considering like the composition at local level for the spatial part. Like if you try to use the on a spatial part, like the computer on an indicator, let's say gross domestic product on the spatial part, and then to try to localize hot spots and cold spots over space based on this sort of global indicator that we have this on the spatial part. So it's like try to decompose, like detaching the part, try to level off hot spots and cold spots, pockets of, let's say, inequalities throughout space and regions, let's say.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much to all of you, Alicia, Alfredo, Domenica.
Thank you.
And now we'll have the presentation by Jaime. Jaime, are you there? And the discussant will be Alfredo Cartone. So don't move really far away, Alfredo. Jaime, are you there?
I'm here.
Okay, Jaime, can you share the screen with us? Okay, we can see it whenever.
Sorry, I have some problems here. Good afternoon for everybody. Let me try to turn on my video here, but I think that I can't permission. So, okay, let's go this way. So, thank you very much. Like Ana said, I am Jaime Prudencio. I'm visiting professor at Universidad Autónoma Metropolitana in Mexico City. And the results of this investigation, this presentation, is the result of a research stay at Universidad de Oviedo with Fernando Rubiera and Esteban Fernandez. So they are also co-authors of this work. And the first thing that I want to call your attention is that we are able to extend the study period compared to what was shown on the poster. It was originally until 2013, but with the most recent data, we are able to extend it to 2018. So let's go ahead with this presentation that it is divided in 4 main parts. In the first one, we are going to talk about the motivation and objectives of this work. In the second part, we are discussing some theoretical ideas between labor productivity and agglomeration forces. Then we present the model that we are thinking that it captures the link between labor productivity and agglomeration forces. And then we present the results and some other ideas. So let's go ahead. We want to start saying that
Sorry, Jaime, can you make the screen a bit bigger?
Okay, let me
just
try
a bit
it.
at the bottom, like you go to the percentage and you make your screen a bit bigger.
Okay.
You have at the moment 90% or something like that.
Okay, I don't know if now you are, let me try it again, please. Sorry for that. Give me just a second. Okay. Give me 1 more second because I have some technical problems here. So probably now, give me 1 second. Probably, okay, probably there. Okay. Sorry, I have problems with sharing my screen. I don't know why, because I can see here the correct screen. I don't know if the problem is okay now. No. Let me try it 1 more time. Sorry. Okay. Okay, let's try it again. Okay. Now you can see the whole screen.
Okay, we can see better. No, not now. The way it was.
Okay, like
yes,
this?
Please.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm sorry for that because I have 2 screens here and it was impossible.
That's okay.
Okay, let's recapitulate. This work is the result of a stay research at University of Oviedo, and we want to start saying that the labor productivity on the manufacturing sector in Mexico is very different between metropolitan areas. As you can see on this table, we have a very big disparities between metropolitan areas. Total population and manufacturing value added per worker results in a very big disparities measured by the standard deviation. Undoubtedly, this is caused by multiple factors. Nevertheless, in an urban and regional frame, the agglomeration forces have a lot to say. It is well known that the agglomeration forces emerge from the physical proximity of economic units, since Marshall pointed out at the end of the 19th century, there has been a lot of works trying to measure the agglomeration forces more appropriately and to figure out the relation of these forces with the performance of economic activity. Although the theoretical relation is clear, the empirical studies of the metropolitan areas in Mexico are not conclusive, since some indicates that the distance to the northern border has a positive effect on the performance of the firms, like this study of Garduño. Meanwhile, some others argue that the large concentration of activity has a negative effect on productivity, like this study here. So, the objective of this paper is to explore the effect of the agglomeration economies on the manufacturing labor productivity in Mexico metropolitan areas. In this map here, we can observe the 74 metropolitan areas. Each color represents one metropolitan area, and we are trying to explore, like I already mentioned, the disparities between the labor productivity in this period of time. And let's go ahead with the next slide. Okay. And there are multiple studies on the effect of agglomeration on labor productivity. The results go in different directions. Some of them states a high positive effect, some others just a marginal little effect, or even a negative impact. And we consider that those results depend on, first, the type of agglomeration forces include, 2, the way those forces are measured, and 3, the specific sector and its own characteristics. For example, Ciccone and Hall investigate the density of economic activity and its relation to increasing returns. Rice and others study the influence of the distance between economic units in large cities on productivity. Antonelli and others try to figure out how agglomeration of technological activities and distance influence product growth and productivity. Meanwhile, Combs, and this work is very important to us, say that agglomeration economies have a little power to explain the dynamics of employment in French regions. But recently, there has been an attempt to give more clarity at the conceptual level of agglomeration forces. In this line of argumentation, the work of Franken and others states that the best way to explain the positive effect of agglomeration, it is through what they call related variety. Meanwhile, the resilience of the employment after an external shock, it is better explained by the non-related variety. So, the studies that include this distinction have increased. For example, for Norway, Astart and others say that the unrelated variety affects negatively on productivity. On the other hand, Witt affirms that the specialization has a marginal effect on productivity in European Union regions. Now, we want to mention some studies for Mexico. We find out that the metropolitan zones are not taking advantages from the agglomeration economies. Moreover, it appears that the impact on productivity is negative. The study on manufacture by Rodriguez Castellan and others made for 70 metropolitan areas find an inverted U-shaped relation between concentration levels and productivity. This brief review indicates that, in fact, there are studies on productivity and agglomeration forces in Mexico, but these studies are from the perspective of total factor productivity, or on the labor productivity case, they attempt to know the effect of competition and only a single agglomeration force. So as far as we know, the relationship between measures of agglomeration economies and the productivity differentials of manufacturing in the region of Mexico has not been explored yet. We think that this work could shed some light to reduce them through the industrial policy. Let's go ahead with the model what we are proposing. To explore the relation between different measures of agglomeration forces, and in an attempt to include the more recent distinction of these forces in the Franken sense, we propose the next model that is based on Combe's work. Here we have the specification, and our dependent variable is the labor productivity of manufacturing in the metropolitan areas at a municipality level. We are including three agglomeration forces. The first one is the specialization index for locational economies here. The second one is the diversity or unrelated variety, which is the inverse of Hirschman and Herfindahl index at a sectoral level. The third force that we are including here is density for urbanization economies, which is the manufacturing employment per square kilometer. These three variables, when we are including only these three variables, we're estimating the model number one that we see shortly. And additionally, we're including two more variables as control variables, plant size and capital density. Plant size here, it's the number of employees by economic unit. And capital density is the total fixed assets per worker here. So the expected sign of all of these coefficients are positive. Let's take a look at this graph that reveals the degree of linear association between each pair of variables. You can notice that the variable that has the greater degree of association with productivity is capital density here. In the second position appears the location coefficient with a correlation greater than 0.5 here. For its part, plant size has a positive linear association, but now equal to 0.27. Meanwhile, occupational density showed slightly positive association here, and the diversity exhibit a negative relation here. The next table shows the results of the fixed effect model that include only the variables linked to the agglomeration forces, the model 1. Meanwhile, the model 2 includes the control variables, plant size, and capital density. Model 2 include these two variables. So, as we can observe, the location coefficient results in a positive and a significant coefficient and slightly greater in the model 2, that you can observe here. Contrary to Combs, who finds a little or even slightly negative effect of the specialization on employment growth in manufacturing. In our case, it is possible to observe that the specialization has a positive influence on the labor productivity levels of this same sector. The measure of unrelated variety, the inverse of Hirschman-Herfindahl index here, shows a negative and significant effect on labor productivity. This result is contrary to what was expected. Diversification tends to affect in a negative way the level of labor productivity. This result is also obtained by Combs for the case of manufacturing, but he established that within some manufacturing sectors, it is possible to find positive effects of diversity on growth in manufacture. The coefficient associated to urbanization economies, this one, is significant, positive, and greater on the second model. It seems to be some influence on productivity explained by the agglomeration urban forces. Contrary to this result, Combs finds that the occupational density has a negative effect on the variable of interest in the industrial sector. Nevertheless, the coefficient associated to urbanization economies is one of the smallest. This could be caused by the very big disparities between the density of employment among the metropolitan areas. Now, Regarding to the control variables that appears only in the model 2, plant size and capital density here, only the second one has the expected positive effect. The coefficient linked to the plant size has a negative impact on productivity. For COMS, the plant size has a negative effect on the dynamic of the industry. However, this should be not interpreted as the absence of economies of scale of within the sector. Now, that brings us to the end of the presentation. And I like to summarize by saying that the evidence shows that there are influence on labor productivity for these 3 agglomeration economic forces, but the sense of the relation was not always on the expected sense. So, specialization has a positive influence on labor productivity. Second, non-related variety has a negative effect. And third, it seems to be some significant influence on productivity, explained by the urban labor manufacturer density. For the control variables, only capital density has the positive effect and smaller than we first thought. And the coefficient linked to the size has a negative impact on labor productivity. According to these results, we are thinking in these possible extensions of this work, that our model could include a distinction between manufacturing activities, because the characteristics of the sectors could be affected in different sense by the agglomeration forces. Second, the causes of negative relation of size on labor productivity must be investigated in deep, and we think it could be related to the aging of capital assets on manufacturing sector. It is interesting to note the greater effect on productivity given by the relative specialization versus capital density itself. According to this, we must recognize that our data are not stratified by the size of economic unit, and this could affect our results because the largest economic units that have not only higher density of capital, but also a greater availability to innovate. So I sincerely appreciate that I have this opportunity to present to you these results, and thank you very much for the organization of this event. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much to you, Jaime. Now, it will be Alfredo Cartone, Alfredo, discussing the paper, but before that, I would like to ask the audience if there's any question. Any question from the audience for Jaime? I guess we are all tired and willing to finish. So Alfredo, your turn.
Okay, I'm here. Thank you. This is a really nice presentation. I really appreciated this as an interesting application for Mexico, which is, I think, which is quite relevant in terms of also trying to analyze those kind of models in terms of, okay, your work isn't quite in line of comms, but it's has different challenges. I mean, in terms of application to really different contexts, geographical contexts that we have in comms from this paper from 2000. And I have only few comments and that basically can distinguish in 2 parts. The first 2 comments are about trying to, if you have any idea about trying to enlarging this review part, I got through the paper a lot, but maybe there's more room for try to analyze your 3 hypotheses, your 3 questions, in terms of also to the topic of business cycle synchronization. If you have this problem with related variety and effects on productivity gaps in terms of related variety, can can be bad or good in terms of possible shocks into the economy. Maybe this could be an additional topic in line with your research question, because sometimes like when you're really specialized on a sector, this can give you a boost in terms of productivity, but can have other consequences on the in your case on municipalities. And maybe try to offer more comparisons with previous studies. I know that you have relatively small literature for the case of Mexico, so those will be mainly comparison with other geographical contexts, but maybe try to compare those your results, which are really interesting, to other situations that you have in the literature. And about the methodological, the engine of the paper, let's say, I don't know if it's in the paper, but you say you control for the fixed effect panel model, and it seems like you control for the units fixed effect. And I don't know if you are able in your data to control also for with time dummies, in order to try to see that we have different trends in the economy, different stages of the economy. So try to control for a time dummy, and this could get more robust results in terms of bias that we have when we do not consider those fixed effects. And I will also, if I will like to see some tests in the model. Try to check for robustness. You do offer a robustness check with the two control variables, but maybe it could be nice to see more develop this part of testing, the hypothesis of the methodological structure that you opt for. And I don't know if you could in some way consider the some spatial effects. I mean, in this model, I will imagine like that you have a sort of spatial effects, especially in the dependent, but I will also consider on the coverage. So I don't know what will be the based on the geographical structure of Mexico. I don't know it very well, but maybe trying to test for 2 or 3 spatial options, static, not dynamic in this panel sense, but maybe the spatial leg of coverage, a spatial Darwin, and a spatial autoregressive, maybe can give you the direction for trying to approach a spatial strategy in the estimation. I don't know if it's proper for you to go over this direction.
Thank you very much, Alfredo. Yes, all your suggestions are very important to us. You're right. We have to include some comparison with another results more nearly to our technique. And yes, I have to discuss this with Fernando and the other author, because there are some technical details that we have to recall and improve to the final version of this paper. So thank you very much for your comments.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much to both of you. And now, finally,
hello. Hello.
Yes, I'm listening.
Oh, I thought I think I lost connection for a bit there because I didn't hear what Ana said.
okay, completely. I was saying that the last paper is yours, Magda, that you're running in, and that you're dealing with topics related to immigration and inequalities in the Imagine project. which is the topic of this presentation as well. And your discussant will be Fernando Rubiera. And I was wondering if Fernando is already around. Fernando, are you there?
I am here, but I don't know that I was the discussant, but okay, I put the special attention in the paper.
What do you mean that you don't know that you were the discussant? Come on, Fernando.
I make a mistake, but okay, I put a special attention now. Okay,
so to help Fernando, everybody, please, one question. Please have one question ready because Fernando has not done his part. That's okay, Fernando, we'll help you out. Magda, whenever you can.
Thank you. Thank you, Ana, and thank you for inviting us to contribute to the special issue and to present our preliminary results or the preliminary draft of our paper. I will be discussing, I'll be talking about perceived social spatial inequality as a determinant of migration decision. And just an overview of this presentation and the research at a glance. So basically we investigate the role that perceived socio-spatial inequalities play in the decision to migrate. And in doing so, we aim to provide insights into which aspects of socio-spatial inequality matter more for migration decisions and how migrants choose a destination over another. So migration is generally considered to be one of the most powerful symbols of inequality, and the spatially uneven distribution of wealth, of opportunities, of privileges has been assumed to be one of the key drivers of international migrations, but also intern migration. There is an extensive body of research that investigates the role of inequality within the country. So relative deprivation, relative poverty, wage differentials within the country, or inequality measured by the Gini coefficient on migration decisions. But few studies have considered the role of between country inequality and how that influences the decision to migrate. And there's a handful of studies that have done so are of a quantitative nature. So they use large data sets at the country level, country-relatable data, which is, of course, very useful for determining causal relationship and for advancing our knowledge of the topic, but is not useful on explaining this relationship in the first place. For instance, what I just mentioned, explaining why migrants choose some countries over other countries. And this implication of the analysis is quite relevant in the context of the European Union, where free mobility enables individuals to choose between 27 countries now, many of which compete for both high-skilled and low-skilled migrants. And we saw this competition last spring when countries such as Germany, the Netherlands, Spain, Italy were vying or were trying to attract Eastern European migrants to work in agricultural jobs mostly. So I'm gonna jump in straight in the methodology. So for this paper, we are using 30 semi-structured interviews in 2 locations in the Netherlands. So we have conducted interviews with 15 Romanian immigrants in Steenbergen, which is in the southern area of the Netherlands, and 15 interviews with Polish immigrants, which is towards the northern part of the country. The interviews were conducted in the spring of 2019 and comprise of questions on reason for migration, destination choice, the migration experience, and 3 dimensions of well-being, which we analyzed within the Imagine project, aspects of material, relational, and emotional well-being, but which will not be discussed in the context of this particular paper. We also complement this data with a couple of graphs from the experimental survey on solidarity and territorial cohesion conducted within the Horizon 2020 project, of which I am a part, as well as Ana and several of the previous presenters, which covers 7 countries. But we focus on Romanian and Polish immigrants, the total sample of which is 50 and 61 respondents respectively. And we focus also on Romanian residents and Polish residents. And I will explain a bit when we go into the actual analysis. So we start the paper with just an overview of migrants' reasons for migrating as revealed by the answers in the survey. So here I'm only looking at Romanian immigrants and Polish immigrants, as the legend shows, and we and also Just as a side note, the percentages do not add up to 100 because the question was an open one in the sense that respondents were allowed to select all the reasons that applied to them, so reasons for migrating. And an overview shows that migrants, both Romanian and Polish migrants, tend to migrate for a variety of reasons, both in terms of economic reasons, better employment opportunities, higher wages, but also non-economic reasons such as lifestyle. There are significant differences in the percentage of people that would migrate for each type of reason between the Polish and the Romanian immigrants, but we do not dwell on this issue right now. The survey also asked residents, so that was about migrants and people that have migrated and what their, I should mention here that because the sample of Romanian migrants and Polish migrants in the Netherlands was rather small, is the cumulative sample over all 7 countries. So this is not necessarily the reasons for migrating to the Netherlands, is the reasons for emigrating in general. The survey also included questions for residents, whether they would consider migrating. And I have about 28% of the Polish respondents, so Polish nationals in Poland, and 29% of the Romanian respondents in Romania answered that they would consider migrating in the future. And then the survey followed up with what would their reasons for migrating be, so reasons for potential migration. And similarly, the reasons range from economic in nature to non-economic reasons. And in this case, the economic higher wages, for instance, and better employment opportunities are the percentages between the two groups are quite similar, as well as the lifestyle percentages as well. So this is just a brief overview of reasons for migrating, either potential migration or migration that has happened already. And this gives us a glimpse into these specific reasons, but it does not tell us why people would migrate and why would they choose particular countries. So for that, we went into analyzing our interviews. So we analyzed our interviews to see whether decision to migrate is motivated by perceived spatial inequalities between sending and receiving countries. And our data indicated that yes, that is indeed the case. Migrants, whenever both migrant groups, both Polish respondents and Romanian respondents, would discuss the reasons for migrating in relative terms. So they would always discuss this reasons for leaving Romania or for leaving Poland in comparison with the reasons for being in the Netherlands or for not being in another destination, which is a point that I will get back to. Importantly, and this is something that we should have in mind, these differences or these inequalities were both of a material and non-material nature. And we use these broad terms, material and non-material, but we also imply economic and non-economic terms, which is something that I kind of alluded to in the graph that I presented. So materially, migrants perceived receiving countries or destination countries to offer higher wages, higher standard of living, better employment opportunities, or higher quality of services than the sending countries, always in relation to the sender countries. Non-materially, they moved because of aspirations for a different culture or different political system, that in their sending country, less corruption, but also for the peace and quiet and sometimes natural surroundings of some of the receiving countries. And it's important to note that these decisions to migrate, the material and the non-material decisions, could be happening simultaneously. So migrants would migrate not exclusively for employment reasons, but also for a mix of employment and perhaps lifestyle decisions. And this is important also to keep into account, going back to the graphs that I presented, that people likely migrated for a variety of reasons, a combined number of reasons. And I plucked some quotes from the case studies just to briefly illustrate what kind of how our respondents would allude to the differences between the origin country and destination country. So for instance, the first respondent alluded to, discussed wage differences between Romania and the Netherlands. The second respondent refers to differences in the standard of living in Romania and in the Netherlands. Another person, in this case, a Polish respondent, referred to difference in jobs, in the availability of jobs, and the wages that those jobs pay for, and another one of the ability to afford a normal life. So again, a standard of living kind of situation. But in terms of non-material reasons for migrating, people refer to cultural aspects which they perceive. For instance, the first Romanian respondent argued that people were less envious in the Netherlands, that the Netherlands is more civilized, it's different than Romania. But others said that they wanted just a new experience and something more challenging in terms of their career possibility. Another Romanian respondent referred to the Netherlands being more peaceful in that sense, and peaceful also. Many respondents, Romanian respondents, perceive the Netherlands to have a slower rhythm of life and to not be as stressful as in Romania, both in terms of jobs and careers, but also in terms just having a joie de vivre and just being more relaxed overall. Others refer to the healthcare system, everything being much better, things being solved much faster. And the last quote that I put, people perceived that social status in the Netherlands does not matter. So people are much more egalitarian in that sense and much more open. So our respondents pointed to both material reasons for migrating, always comparing the country of departure, whether that is Poland or Romania, with the country of arrival, in this case, the Netherlands. But they did not only compare, they did not only juxtapose these two countries, but they also referred to other potential destinations which they went, I guess, to come to the Netherlands. So respondents refer to, for instance, the first Romanian respondent discussed having researched all countries with a good future, looking at their future technologically, financially, checking happiness in indexes, for instance, when the Netherlands takes a very good position. So doing actual research in order to select a country and looking at what we consider patterns or of indicators of inequality. Others chose the Netherlands because they perceive it to not be as racist as other countries. This person referred to the UK, but this is an inequality or a difference between the Netherlands and other countries, which is of a non-material nature. Others consider that earnings were better in other countries where they have been or when they were planning or considering to go, like Belgium in this case, or Italy or the UK. But also the Dutch people were perceived to be warmer, respectful, not as people in other countries. So whenever they would compare, so the bottom line here is that our respondents did not only compare their sending country, their origin country, with the country in which they arrived, but they also compare it with potential destination, highlighting or giving us a glimpse into the reasons why they select one country over another. And the reasons for which they did so were both economic reasons, material reasons, as we call them, and non-material reasons, non-economic. So this was just a quick glimpse into our research and what we plan to do in this paper. Preliminary conclusions would be that migration decisions are motivated and influenced by perceived differences between sending and receiving countries. When we look at the data that, for instance, we're presenting in the graph, that people migrate for better job opportunities, higher wages, so on and so forth, we get a glimpse into these reasons, but these reasons, these factors do not appear into a vacuum, right? So they are relative to others. So this is why we basically try to show when we discuss, when we argue that migration is determined by perceived social and spatial differences between sending and receiving countries and origin or destinations, that people always think in relative terms. These differences are of both material and immaterial nature, as I try to emphasize throughout the presentation. Importantly, and this is something that we discovered in the paper, that non-material reasons seem to matter more for the Romanian migrants than for the Polish migrants in our case study. So Polish migrants almost exclusively refer to material reasons for migrating, whereas Romanian migrants tended to have a mix, or the sample to be split along these two lines. Destination choices also were influenced by perceived differences between competing options. Again, these differences, both material and non-material, so higher wages, but also a higher happiness index. And again, it's not always either or. People don't necessarily migrate only for material reasons or only for immaterial reasons. There's always a combination of these factors. Essentially, migration provides individuals with the opportunity to move from countries which they perceive to be lagging behind in terms of social, economic, political factors, or what we call material or immaterial factors of a material or immaterial nature, to countries where they perceive to be offering better opportunities or better conditions in these areas. So thank you for your attention. I look forward to hear your comments and questions and suggestions if you have any.
Okay, Fernando. Well, think about one question, but before you, maybe some members of the audience have something to say, something interesting, if possible. Somebody, please. Well, I have something, Magda. How are you going to treat the respondents, the immigrants that have moved to different European places and then ended up in whatever country? In this case, you were showing results for the Netherlands. Mm-hmm. Those immigrants are kind of premium immigrants with comparative information. Mm-hmm. I'm trying to say that it's different that you run an interview with an immigrant that just arrived into the Netherlands and never has moved from the Netherlands, so has nothing to compare, than some other immigrants you seem to have that have moved to the UK, to Italy, and then end up, or Belgium, and then they end up in the Netherlands. That information is higher quality information because it's also comparable information. But having said that, also take into account that you are living in the Netherlands, you are being interviewed in the Netherlands. They can be talking very, very nice words about the Netherlands, but if somebody from Germany were interviewing them, maybe they were talking badly about the Netherlands. Mm-hmm. I mean, there can be a bias there, yeah? Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. What I'm trying to say is two things. Those immigrants have also comparable information, not only, they have to be taken very seriously, but at the same time, they can have that bias.
Yeah, yeah. And this is something that we of course have to discuss and to put a disclaimer in the paper. But I think the first question that you asked actually enriches our paper, because we do have respondents in our sample who are first-time migrants, so they have come straight to the Netherlands, and we have respondents who have a long history of migration to many countries within the European Union. So then our paper basically gets a new layer of information and insight into how these people choose, basically have the knowledge of other experiences, and how the other choose without the knowledge, like the person that basically just Googled happiness index, or Googled which countries are going to be more advanced and selected that country based on that. But this is a very good question, and I think it's just enriching the paper. And the other one, of course, is just a disclaimer that we need to discuss. Of course, it's always with interview, they're not representative, the scope of interviews and qualitative data is not the same as surveys. So, but yeah, it's a very good question. Thank you.
And because the story is, the ones interviewed in the UK also say the same. Oh, first I was in the Netherlands and before I was in Italy, but now the best place is the UK?
In the Welsh case study that we have, which we do not include in the paper, I think that's a different type of migration. Most of the respondents there were students first, and they decided to migrate. So they didn't go to Wales in search of better wages or a different lifestyle. It was a different type of migration, mostly education related.
I was just dropping an example, you know,
because no, but it's a good point, and I take it. And yeah, thank you.
And then the perceived inequality. Are you going to introduce the topic of the real inequality in this paper, or you leave it for some other paper or some other comparison, you know, because of the data that we have in the Imagine? Now you have information about the perceived inequality, but we also have information about the real inequality that exists. Are you going to play with that idea?
I think the plan was to do so. We didn't include this in the paper yet because we wanted to clarify a bit more what we're trying to do. But we have just delivered a report on the perceived versus the objective inequalities. So the data and the insight is very much there. So yeah, I think that would add another layer of complexity and insights to the paper, and try to explain why they have these perceptions and what are the objectives. Even though from the report I can already kind of advance that many times, at least in the case of Poland and Romania, their perceptions of the country are met by the objective indicators.
Okay,
so they match.
They match, yeah. There's no big gaps between them.
Yeah.
Come on, Fernando, I've given you a hand there, but now you're by yourself.
Thank you, Ana. But
there is also
I've seen that Daniela.
Also, there could be more audience. Hold on, maybe somebody else is going to give you a hand, Fernando.
Yes.
Hold on. Somebody from the audience, please. I think I heard somebody.
Just saying that there is a comment on the text, in the text, in the, how do you call it, comment place.
I had a question that was written in the chat section for Magda. First, I want to say that I have enjoyed very much your presentation, and my question was about the influence of the educational mismatch on the reasons to migrate. Have you taken into consideration this influence? Because we know that in many cases the migrants do not find the jobs at their educational level. To meet this educational level, they accept less, and how this influences their option, their decision to migrate.
We have not considered this. Thank you for the question. This is, this is a very good question. We have not considered this in the paper, but we have considered it in the report, because we do have a question in the survey in which we ask their perceptions of job availabilities and their perception of suitable jobs availabilities in each country. So we can compare their perceptions in the countries in which they arrive and in the origin countries. So as expected, most in all countries, in all 7 countries in the survey, respondents tend to rate less well, so worse, the availability of suitable job opportunities than of job opportunities generally, but Romania fares particularly poorly among all countries. But at the same time, perceptions of good jobs, of suitable jobs, are also quite poor in countries such as the Netherlands, which was also a surprise. So, and this also comes across from the interviews, where people say, yes, I have a job, but I cannot have access to a job that matches particularly in the Netherlands, where language is a big barrier to finding jobs that suit their skills and educational levels. Of course, it's also a matter of which sample you analyze, because we focus specifically on individuals working in agricultural occupations in these two areas in order to find similarities, and it was part of our selection process. And we found very few individuals not matched with their level of education. So most of them were low educated, working in agricultural jobs, agricultural related jobs, or medium skill job, low skill jobs, but only one person in our sample was mismatched in that sense, being high educated and having a low educated jobs. But it's a good point to take, and of course other reasons for migrating, also network effects was a really big had a really big impact and kind of gave a push to many people who were undecided or didn't know whether to go or where to go. And then of course that also influenced. Thank you for the question. I will, I wrote it down.
Thank you, Daniela. Was a very interesting point, by the way. The good reason for migrating nationally or internationally. Daniela, what you have behind you is your garden or a screensaver?
Well, yes, it's my secret garden.
No way, really? So we're all going to Romania
I'm just joking, yeah. Actually, is a garden from Mallorca.
Oh,
yes.
nice.
Yeah.
We should all be there now.
Yeah. Now I'm in Bucharest, in the cold Bucharest.
Well, Fernando, your turn.
Yes, yes. No, I have a couple of questions. Yes, after seeing your presentation, because I don't receive the paper, so that's the reason that I make this my misunderstanding, and I don't know that I have this obligation of commenting your paper. Sorry for that. But if I receive the paper, I write you an email with more questions or more things. If the paper suggests me more questions. But anyway, in any case, after your presentation, that by the way is a fantastic presentation, congratulations. But one thing that worries me is that the number of interviews that you have is, if I understand well, 15 people, no? 15 people. That is, I understand the differences between the sociology perspective or sociology approach and the qualitative analysis and the economic perspective. But for us, working with only 15 people is something very dangerous. No? Yep. And in some of the graphs that you present at the beginning, there are very clear results, and we imagine that these results are completely true because it's what we can expect. But these small differences between Polish and Romanian maybe it's just because of the small number of the people that you interview. No? In that sense, the thing that I think that is better is to focus not in the material part, because probably in that part with only 15 interviews, you don't have nothing to contribute to the literature of working with more big people, no? Number of people, and analysis that are more deep, consider more people. No, so I focus. If I were you, I focus all my analysis in the non-material part, no? Because it's what you can extract from this interview much more interesting than the material analysis. That probably is better to see if it's coherent with previous literature. No, no entering in any special. And in that part, probably you make that, no, in the paper, but. In the analysis of the non-material factors, something that was interesting for me, I think that it was very interesting for me, is seeing if what is the relationship between the answers of the people and the condition, the characteristics of the people. If the level of studies that they have, if they have family or they don't have family, with they when they emigrate, because I think that this institutional or cultural factor are much more important when you are traveling with all of your family, and the material factors are more important when you are traveling alone. These factors, to take more advantage of your interviews, probably are very interesting. And this is impossible in your analysis, but for the future work, something that is very interesting for me in your field, as a person that just a reader of this type of analysis, but it's what happened when these people come back, if they come back, when these people come back to their countries. They are a kind of virus that introduce in their country these institutional factors that they learn in the other country, or they adapt to the characteristics of the country when they come back. I don't know if you understand me, the question, but I am sure that in this occasion it's not possible to do that. But if you can follow some of these people and some of them come back to the original countries, it's very interesting to observing if these people maintain and introduce these changes in her mind during the time in Netherlands when they come back to Romania or Poland, or not, or they adapt to the characteristic of the country. No? I think that it was very important in Spain during the immigration of Spain. When the immigrant comes back to Spain, some of the changes in the countries comes from this return of some of these immigrants that they introduce new business, a new way of making the business in the country. No? That is my question. Sorry, I don't have more questions.
Thank you. No, thank you. And apologies, I did not send the paper yet because it's a very rough draft at this point. I have been working on the topic precisely because I work within the Imagine project, and we have reports and we analyze the data. Thank you very much for your questions. I'm going to start with the last one. I haven't personally looked into it, but I know there is research on the effects of immigration on sending countries, both economic effects, social effects, political effects. Anecdotally, from the case of Romania, I know that 2 years ago there were massive protests against the corrupt government, and it was organized by migrants. So also a great number of migrants came to Bucharest and joined the process, but the protest, but also organize it via social media and all that. So there is, in that sense, an effect of, I guess, the institutional culture that they kind of aspire or get inspired by in countries abroad, and then they try to transfer that knowledge or to do something for Romania as well. But I guess this is kind of a group effect. Generally, individual effects might be, individual people might get lost and kind of adjust to the country. I also, you mentioned also the characteristics of the migrants, which is a very good point. With this sample, I think it would be too much to go into the characteristics of the migrants because everybody has, some people are joined by their partners, some people have families back home, some people are low skilled, some people are medium skilled, some are old, some are, so it would be to split them into groups. But we did do that with a bigger project in which we analyzed it, and we found some broad generalizations. We didn't look specifically at family, but we looked at, for instance, educated versus low-skilled versus high-skilled migrants, and we noticed differences in terms of reasons for migrating, that low-skilled migrants tend to migrate more for economic reasons, where high-skilled migrants more for lifestyle or aspirations. We noticed differences between Eastern European migration and Western European migration, because we also have migrants from Western Europe and the reasons, and we notice again differences in terms of more economic material reasons for Western Europe, more lifestyle migration options or choices and determinants for Western Europe. So again, all of these point to systemic inequalities between different regions within Europe and between origin and destination countries. So I think I forgot the first question that you had. I'm sorry for that.
No, it's a comment that maybe it's more interesting to focus in non-material factors more than the material ones, no? But just because the material is more in the literature, in the economic literature, maybe in that case you only you can refer to the previous literature to be sure that your results are in line with the previous results, no?
We also think this is one of the most important contributions that we can make to kind of reveal the fact that they don't only exclusively migrate, but they also have these other perceptions and impressions of countries which greatly account for their decisions to migrate and for their location choices, whether they have experience, like Ana pointed out, whether they have previous migration experience or they don't have, they form opinions of their destinations. And these opinions are usually formed because of their perceptions of differences between countries. Thank you very much for your comments, and apologies for not sending a paper in advance.
No, apologies because probably I make a mistake. Sorry, but very interesting presentation.
Thank you.
And Anna likes
Okay.
the garden of Daniela, but I like your library behind you. It's very, very nice.
Thank you. Thank you.
I think that those books are not fake. I think they are real.
They are, yes.
Thank you very much, everybody. This was the last presentation. Thanks to all of you for your participation, for your questions, for your suggestions. And let's see if we can meet next time face to face, which is always much more interesting because after the talks, we will go to have a bottle of wine or some beers or something, which is always welcome. And we could keep on talking about these topics and many, many more. But so far, this is the way it is online. That's the only way we can see each other. By the way, I'm gonna switch on the camera a little bit. And nothing, thanks for being there. Don't forget about the deadline for sending the full article, please. Yeah, it's approaching. And let's see if we do a really fast job and the special issue is published soon enough with the help of Tomaz, who is somewhere over there, over the rainbow. Thank you very much to all of you and take good care. Please take care.
Thank you, Anna.
Bye. Bye.
Thank you for everybody.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye bye.